Chapter 7, Isolated and Modernized Melanesians. Since our quest was to gather data that will throw light upon the cause of modern physical degeneration among human racial stocks in various parts of the world, it became necessary to include for study various groups living in the hot sultry climates of the tropics. Again, it was desirable to obtain contact with both highly isolated and, therefore, relatively primitive stocks for comparison with modernized groups of the same stock. In order to accomplish this, an expedition was made in 1934 to 8 archipelagos of the southern Pacific to study groups of Melanesians and Polynesians. The Melanesians described here were living in New Caledonia and the Fiji Islands. If the causative factors for the physical degeneration of mankind are practically the same everywhere, it should be possible to find a common cause operating, regardless of climate, race, or environment. Owing to the vast extent of the Pacific waters and the limited number of transportation lines, it became very difficult to arrange a convenient itinerary. This, however, was finally accomplished satisfactorily by going southward through the more easterly archipelagos, namely, the Marquesas Islands, Society Islands and Cook Islands, then westward to the Tongan Islands in the southern central Pacific near New Zealand, and then westward to New Caledonia near Australia. From this group we went northward to the Fiji Islands, also in the western Pacific, then to the Samoan Islands in the central Pacific south of the equator, and then to the Hawaiian Islands north of the equator. These island groups were all populated by different racial stocks speaking different languages. The movements from archipelago to archipelago were made on the larger ships, and between the islands of the group in small crafts, except in the Hawaiian Islands where an aeroplane was used. The program in each group consisted in making contact with local guides and interpreters. They had generally been arranged for in advance by correspondence with government officials. By these means we were able to reach isolated groups in locations quite distant from contact with trade or merchant ships. To reach these isolated groups often required going over rough and difficult trails, since most of the islands being of volcanic formation are mountainous. On reaching the isolated groups, our greetings and the purpose of the mission were conveyed by our interpreters to the chiefs. Much time was often lost in going through necessary ceremonials and feasting. In every instance we received a very cordial reception and excellent cooperation. In no instance was there antagonism. Through the underground telegraph they always seemed to know we were coming and had prepared for us. When these formalities were once over and our wishes made known, the chiefs instructed the members of their tribes to carry out our program for making examinations, recording personal data, making photographs, and collecting samples of foods for chemical analysis. The food samples were either dried or preserved in formalin. The detailed records for every individual included data on the tribe, village and family, his age, previous residence, physical development, the kinds of foods eaten, the physical condition of every tooth, including presence or absence of cavities, the shape of the dental arches, the shape and development of the face, and detailed notes on divergences from racial type. Special physical characteristics were photographed. A compression was made of these factors for each of the more isolated members of the same tribe and those in the vicinity of the port or landing place of the island. Through the government officials, detailed information was secured, usually in the form of the annual government statistical reports, showing the kind and quantity of the various ingredients and articles that were imported, and similarly those that were exported. Contact was made in each island group with the health officers, and the studies were usually made with their assistance. In many instances the only contact with civilization had consisted of the call of a small trading ship once or twice a year to gather up the copra or dried coconut, seashells and such other products as the natives had accumulated for exchange. Payment for these products was usually made in trade goods and not in money. The following articles consisted nearly always of 90% of the total value: white flour and sugar. 10% consisted of wearing apparel or material for that apparel. While the missionaries have encouraged the people to adopt habits of modern civilization, in the isolated districts the tribes were not able to depart much from their native foods because of the infrequency of the call of the trader ship. Effort had been made in almost all of the islands to induce the natives to cover their bodies, especially when in sight of strangers. In several islands regulatory measures had been adopted requiring the covering of the body. This regulation had greatly reduced the primitive practice of coating the surface of the body with coconut oil, which had the effect of absorbing the ultraviolet rays, thus preventing injury from the tropical sun. This coating of oil enabled them to shed the rain, which was frequently torrential though of short duration. The irradiation of the coconut oil was considered by the natives to provide, in addition, an important source of nutrition. Their newly acquired wet garments became a serious menace to the comfort and health of the wearers. The early navigators who visited these South Sea islands reported the people as being exceedingly strong, vigorously built, beautiful in body and kindly disposed. There were formerly dense populations on most of the inhabitable islands. In contrast with this, one now finds that on many of the islands the death rate has come to so far exceed the birth rate that the very existence of these racial groups is often seriously threatened. The island of New Caledonia is one of the largest of the Pacific. It is situated in the vicinity of 23 degrees south latitude and 165 degrees east longitude. The New Caledonians are pure Melanesian stock. They are broad-shouldered, very muscular, and in the past have been very warlike. These islands are under French control. The foreign population is chiefly French, and limited mainly to the vicinity of the one port of Nouma. The subjugation of these people has been very difficult, and as recently as 1917 are banned from the interior in protest against efforts to establish a white colony and sugar plantation on a desirable section of coastal land swept down on the French colony in the night and massacred almost the entire population. Their contact with the required foods from the sea had been cut off. They believed they require seafoods to maintain life and physical efficiency. The physical development of the primitive people, including their teeth and dental arches, is of very high order. A comparison of the individuals living near the ports with those living in the isolated inland locations shows marked increase in the incidence of dental caries. For those living almost exclusively on the native foods, the incidence of dental caries was only 0.14%, while for those using trade foods the incidence of dental caries was 26%. The splendid facial and dental arch development of these quite primitive Caledonians is shown in Figure 28. Note also their kinky hair and strong neck and face muscles. Figure 28. These Melanesians are typical in general physical build and facial and dental arch form of their race, which is spread over a wide area of islands in the southeastern Pacific. The nutrition of all is adequate for them to develop and maintain their racial pattern. The Fiji Island group lies between 15 and 22 degrees south latitude and between 177 degrees west and 175 degrees east longitude, thus straddling the international date line. The Fiji Islanders are similar in physical development and appearance to the New Caledonians, and like them are largely, if not wholly, Melanesian in racial origin. The men have kinky hair and broad shoulders. In the past, they have been excellent warriors. They are not as tall as their hereditary enemies, the Tongans, to the east, and in order to make themselves look equally tall, they have adopted the practice of training their kinky hair straight out from the head to a height often reaching 6 or more inches. Typical facial and dental arch forms are shown in Figure 29. They are British subjects, and where they have had supervision, in the districts near the ports and on those islands on which sugar plantations have been established, they have suffered very greatly from the degenerative diseases. Figure 29. The development of the facial bones determines the size and shape of the palate and the size of the nasal air passages. Note the strength of the neck of the men above and the well-proportioned faces of the girls below. Such faces are usually associated with properly proportioned bodies. Tooth decay is rare in these mouths so long as they use an adequate selection of the native foods. Since Viti Levu, one of the islands of this group, is one of the larger islands of the Pacific Ocean, I had hoped to find on it a district far enough from the sea to make it necessary for the natives to have lived entirely on land foods. Accordingly, with the assistance of the government officials and by using a recently opened government road, I was able to get well into the interior of the island by motor vehicle, and from this point to proceed farther inland on foot with two guides. I was not able, however, to get beyond the piles of seashells which had been carried into the interior. My guide told me that it had always been essential, as it is today, for the people of the interior to obtain some food from the sea, and that even during the times of most bitter warfare between the inland or hill tribes and the coast tribes, those of the interior would bring down during the night choice plant foods from the mountain areas and place them in caches and return the following night and obtain the sea foods that had been placed in those depositories by the Shur tribes. The individuals who carried these foods were never molested, not even during active warfare. He told me further that they require food from the sea at least every 3 months, even to this day. This was a matter of keen interest, and at the same time disappointment, since one of the purposes of the expedition to the South Seas was to find, if possible, plants or fruits which together, without the use of animal products, were capable of providing all of the requirements of the body for growth and for maintenance of good health and a high state of physical efficiency. Among the sources of animal foods was the wild pig from the bush. These were not native, but imported into nearly all of the islands, and they have become wild where there is an abundance of food for them. Another animal food was that from coconut crabs, which grow to a weight of several pounds. At certain seasons of the year the crabs migrate to the sea in great numbers from the mountains and interior country. They spend about 3 days in the sea for part of their reproductive program and return later to their mountain habitats. Their routes of travel are as nearly as possible in straight lines. At the season of migration, large numbers of the crabs are captured for food. These crabs rob the coconut trees of fruit. They climb the trees during the darkness and return to the ground before the dawn. They cut off the coconuts and allow them to drop to the ground. When the natives hear coconuts dropping in the night, they put a girdle of grass around the tree 15 or 20 feet from the ground, and when the crabs back down and touch the grass, they think that they are down on the ground, let go their hold and are stunned by the fall. The natives then collect the crabs and put them in a pen where they are fed on shredded coconut. In 2 weeks' time the crabs are so fat that they burst their shells. They are then very delicious eating. Freshwater fish of various kinds are used where available from the mountain streams. Land animal foods, however, are not abundant in the mountainous interior, and no places were found where the native plant foods were not supplemented by seafoods. Our first visit to the Fiji Islands was in 1934, and the second in 1936. On our first trip we had much personal assistance from Ratapopai, hereditary king. His residence was on the royal island reserved exclusively for the king and his retinue. His picture is shown in figure 30 with that of Mrs. Price. He was very solicitous for the welfare of his people, whom he recognized to be rapidly breaking down with modernization. The council house is also shown in figure 30. He gave us very important information regarding the origin of cannibalism, relating it to a recognition of special food values of special organs, particularly the livers. Figure 30. The building above is the Fiji Council House and shows the typical form of native architecture. No nails or bolts are used. It is located on the King's Island Mbor. The hereditary monarch, Ratapopai, is seen with Mrs. Price. Notice splendid features. Beneath his coat he wears a native skirt and is barefooted. There has been a very extensive development of sugar plantations on the larger islands of several of the Pacific archipelagos. The working of these plantations has required the importation of large numbers of indentured laborers. These have been brought chiefly from India and China. Since they are nearly all men, those who have married have obtained their wives from among the natives. This, the Chinese have done quite frequently. Since they are excellent workers, they provide good homes and are good businessmen. They are, in many districts, rapidly becoming the landowners and are men of influence. This influx of Asiatics, together with that of Europeans, has had an important influence upon the purity of the native race around the ports and provided an opportunity to study the effect of intermingling of races upon the susceptibility to dental caries. No differences in extent of tooth decay due to ancestry were disclosed. The incidence of dental caries at the points of contact with imported foods was 30.1% of teeth examined as compared with 0.42 for the more isolated groups living on the native foods of land and sea. The physical changes which were found associated with the use of the imported foods included the loss of immunity to dental caries in practically all of the individuals who had displaced their native foods very largely with the modern foods. Dental caries was much worse, however, in the growing children and motherhood group due to the special demands of these individuals. These conditions are illustrated in Figs 31 and 32. The boy shown in Figure 32, upper left, typifies the suffering brought by modernization. Obs's teeth often cause suicide. Figure 31. These natives of the Fiji Islands illustrate the effect of changing from the native food to the imported foods of commerce. Tooth decay becomes rampant and with it is lost the ability to properly masticate the food. Growing children and childbearing mothers suffer most severely from dental caries. Figure 32. No dentists or physicians are available on most of these islands. Toothache is the only cause of suicide. The new generation born after the parents adopt the imported modern foods often have a change in the shape of the face and dental arches. The teeth are crowded as shown below. Another important phase of the studies included a critical examination of the facial form and shape of the dental arches, which include very definite and typical changes represented by the narrowing of the features and the lengthening of the face with crowding of the teeth in the arch. These are illustrated in the lower half of Figure 32. The members of the Melanesian race living on the Fiji Islands of the Pacific, whether volcanic or coral in origin, have developed a very high immunity to dental caries and well-formed faces and dental arches. Their native foods consisted of animal life from the sea eaten with plants and fruits from the land in accordance with a definite program of food selection. In their primitive state only 0.42% of their teeth were attacked by tooth decay. In the modernized groups this incidence increased to 30.1%. The change in the nutrition included a marked reduction in the native foods and their displacement with white flour products, sugar and sweetened goods, canned foods and polished rice. In the succeeding generations after the parents had adopted the modern foods, there occurred distinct change in facial form and shape of the dental arches. Chapter 8, Isolated and Modernized Polynesians. The characteristics of the Polynesian race included straight hair, oval features, happy, buoyant dispositions and splendid physiques. When the Pacific Islands were discovered, the Polynesians were found inhabiting the Hawaiian Islands, the Marquesas Islands, the Tuamotu group including Tahiti, the Cook Islands, the Tongan Islands and the Samoan group. The first group studied was made up of the people of the Marquesas Islands, which are situated 9 degrees south latitude and 140 degrees west longitude, about 4,000 miles due west of Peru. Few, if any, of the primitive racial stocks of the South Sea Islands were so enthusiastically extolled for their beauty and excellence of physical development by the early navigators. Much tooth decay prevails today. They reported the Marquesans as vivacious, happy people numbering over 100,000 on the 7 principal islands of this group. Probably in few places in the world can so distressing a picture be seen today as is found there. A French government official told me that the native population had decreased to about 2,000. chiefly as a result of the ravages of tuberculosis. Serious epidemics of smallpox and measles have at times taken a heavy toll. In a group of approximately 100 adults and children, I counted 10 who were emaciated and coughing with typical signs of tuberculosis. Many were waiting for treatment at a dispensary 8 hours before the hour it opened. In the past, some of the natives have had splendid physiques, fine countenances, and some of the women have had beautiful features. They are now a sick and dying primitive group. A trader ship was in port exchanging white flour and sugar for their copra. They have largely ceased to depend on the sea for food. Tooth decay was rampant. At the time of the examination, 36.9% of the teeth of the people using trade food in conjunction with their land plants and fruits had been attacked by tooth decay. The individuals living entirely on native foods were few. Some early navigators were so highly impressed with the beauty and health of these people that they reported the Marquesas Islands as the Garden of Eden. Tahiti is the principal island of the Society Group. It is situated 17 degrees south of the equator, 149 degrees west longitude. Fortunately, degeneration has not been so rapid nor so severe here. The Tahitian population, however, has reduced from over 200,000 as early estimated, to a present native population estimated at about 10,000. These islands are also a part of French Oceania. Many of the able-bodied men were taken from these French islands to France to fight in the World War. Only a small percentage, however, returned, and they were mostly crippled and maimed. The Tahitians are a buoyant, light-hearted race, fully conscious, however, of their rapid decline in numbers and health. Many of the more primitive are very fine-looking and have excellent dental arches, as seen in Figure 33. Figure 33. Polynesians are a beautiful race and physically sturdy. They have straight hair and their color is often that of a sun-tanned European. They have perfect dental arches. The capital of Tahiti, Papeete, is the administrative center for the French Pacific possessions. It has a large foreign population, and there is considerable commerce in and out of this port. Much imported food is used. Like on the Marquesas Islands, it was difficult to find large numbers of individuals living entirely on the native foods. Those that were found had complete immunity to dental caries. For the natives living in part on trade foods, chiefly white flour, sugar and canned goods, 31.9% of the teeth were found to be attacked by tooth decay. Typical extensive destruction of the teeth amongst the modernized Tahitians is shown in Figure 34. There is a large colony of Chinese in Tahiti, brought there as indentured laborers. They have not returned. When the Tahitian men did not return from the war, their wives married the Chinese, who are good workers. Figure 34. Wherever the native foods have been displaced by the imported foods, dental caries becomes rampant. These are typical modernized Tahitians. The Cook Islands are British and under the direct guidance of the New Zealand government. Rarotonga is the principal island. It is situated in the Pacific Ocean in the vicinity of 21 degrees south latitude and 160 degrees west longitude. It has a delightful climate the year around. Racially, according to legend, the Maori tribe, the native tribe of New Zealand, migrated there from the Cook Islands. In addition to being similar in physical development and appearance, their languages are sufficiently similar so that each can understand the other, even though their separation occurred probably over 1,000 years ago. It is a matter of great importance that the inhabitants of these South Sea islands were skillful navigators and boat builders. It was a common occurrence for expeditions both peaceful and aggressive to make journeys of 1,000 and 2,000 miles in crafts propelled by manpower and wind and carrying in addition an adequate supply of water and food for their journey. A large number were found in Rarotonga living almost entirely on native foods, and only 0.3% of the teeth of these individuals have been attacked by dental caries. In the vicinity of Avaroa, the principal port, however, the natives were living largely on trade foods, and among these 29.5% of the teeth were found to have been attacked by dental caries. In Figure 35, top, are seen typically fine faces and teeth. However, at the lower left is shown a child at the port whose parents were living on the imported food. This boy's upper lateral teeth are erupting inside the arch. In the lower right is a child with normal spacing of the deciduous teeth. Figure 35. These Polynesians live on the island of Rarotonga. At the top are two examples of typically fine faces and teeth. Below, at left, is seen a full-blood Polynesian child with the dental arch so small that the permanent laterals are developing inside the arch. His parents used imported food. At the right below is a mixed blood of white and Polynesian. Note the normal spacing of the temporary teeth before the permanent set appears. Parents used native foods. Under British guidance, the Cook Islanders have much better health than the Marquesans or the Tahitians. Their population is not seriously decreasing, and is untroubled except for the progressive development of the degenerative diseases around the port. They are thrifty and happy, and are rapidly developing a local culture including a school system supported by natives. The inhabitants of the Tongan Islands, the principal of which is Tongatabu, are Polynesian. This group, containing over 100 islands, is situated between 18 and 22 degrees south latitude and between 173 and 176 degrees west longitude, and has a native population of about 28,000. They have the distinction of being one of the last absolute monarchies of the world. While they are under the protection of Great Britain, they largely manage their own affairs. Their isolation is nearly complete except for a call from an infrequent trader. They seem to be credited by the inhabitants of the other islands as being the greatest warriors of the Pacific. The Tongans at least acknowledge that they are the greatest warriors, and indeed the greatest people of the world. They will not step aside to allow anyone to pass, since they say that when the world was created and populated they were the first to be made, next was the pig, and last the white man. Ethnologically, they are said to be a mixture of the darker Melanesians with their kinky hair, and the fairer Polynesians of the eastern archipelagos with straight hair. It is said they have never been defeated in battle. For centuries they and the Fijian tribes 700 miles to the west have frequently been at war. The British government has very skillfully directed this racial rivalry into athletics. While we were in the Fiji Islands, the British government provided a battle cruiser to carry the football team from Fiji to Nuku'alofa for the annual contest of strength. These islanders have practiced eugenics by selecting tall, strong mates. The Queen of the Islands was 6 feet 3 inches in height. The limited importation of foods to the Tongan Islands due to the infrequent call of merchant or trading ships has required the people to remain largely on their native foods. Following the war, however, the price of copra went up from $40 per ton to $400, which brought trading ships with white flour and sugar to exchange for the copra. The effect of this is shown very clearly in the condition of the teeth. The incidence of dental caries among the isolated groups living on native foods was 0.6%, while for those around the port living in part on trade foods, it is 33.4%. The effect of the imported food was clearly to be seen on the teeth of the people who were in the growth stage at that time. Now the trader ships no longer call, and this forced isolation is very clearly a blessing in disguise. Dental caries has largely ceased to be active since imported foods became scarce, for the price of copra fell to $4 a ton. The temporary rise in tooth decay was apparently directly associated with the calling of trader ships. The Samoan Islands are located in the vicinity of 14 degrees south latitude and between 166 and 174 degrees west longitude. The native population of the Samoan Islands is Polynesian. The control of the islands is divided between two governments. The eastern group is American. The western group is British since the World War, before which it was under German control. The western group is now under a mandate to New Zealand. Through the kindness of the governor and naval officers of American Samoa, transportation was provided on an auxiliary craft to the various islands of the American Samoan group. We were particularly indebted to Commander Stevenson, Director of Health, whose guests we were, for continued personal assistance in making favorable contacts in nearly all villages of the American Samoan group. In no islands of the Pacific did we find so excellent an organization for health service. Dispensaries have been established within reach of nearly all the villages besides hospital service at Pago Pago, the port of Tutla. This is the finest port in the Pacific Ocean. Notwithstanding the regular monthly contact through merchant ships to and from America and Australia, many isolated groups were found living largely on the native foods. A dental survey had recently been made of this group by Lieutenant Commander Ferguson. The excellent facial and dental arch development of the Samoans is illustrated in the upper half of Figure 36. The change in facial and dental arch form which follows the use of modern food by the parents is shown in the lower half of Figure 36. Note the marked irregularity of the teeth. This is one of the few groups of islands in which the population is not rapidly decreasing, indeed there is some increase. The Navy personnel includes one dentist. Practically all his time is required for the personnel and families of the Navy at this station. Accordingly, he can do only a limited amount of emergency service such as extractions for the natives. About 90% of the inhabitants of American Samoa are on the largest island, Tutla, and due to the development of roads, a considerable number of the people have access to the main port, to which several of them come on ship days to sell their wares and to buy provisions to augment their native foods. The incidence of dental caries among those individuals living in part on imported foods at the port as compared with those in remote districts living on native foods was as follows. Those almost exclusively on native foods had 0.3% of the teeth attacked by dental caries, and for those on trade foods, 18.7%. Seafoods used here include many shellfish which are gathered and sold largely by the young people. The octopus, the sea crab and the bush demir eaten raw were used. Figure 36. Note the marked difference in facial and dental arch form of the two Samoan primitives above and the two modernized below. The face bones are underdeveloped below, causing a marked constriction of the arches with crowding of the teeth. This is a typical expression of inadequate nutrition of the parents. The Hawaiian Islands lie between 18 and 22 degrees north latitude and between 154 and 160 degrees west longitude. These islands are quite unlike any of the other Pacific island groups previously discussed. Sugar and pineapple plantations cover vast areas and together constitute by far the most important industries of these islands. In many districts the population is almost entirely foreign or of various blends, chiefly of Filipinos and Japanese with Hawaiians. There is a large American population and a considerable European. These different racial groups have largely brought their own customs which are rapidly submerging the native customs. Since the native population is so greatly reduced in comparison with the foreign population, and because intermarrying has been so general, it was difficult to find large groups of relatively pure-blooded Hawaiians either living almost entirely on native foods or on modernized foods. Though the number of the individuals in these groups is accordingly not large, important data were obtained for comparing the relative incidence of dental caries and other degenerative processes. While the preparation of foods on the various Pacific islands has many common factors, all natives using the underground oven of hot stones for cooking, the Hawaiian Islands present one unique difference in the method of preparation of their taro. They cook the root as do all the other tribes, but having done so they dry the taro, powder it and mix it with water and allow it to ferment for several hours, usually 24 or more. This preparation called poi becomes slightly tart by the process of fermentation and has the consistency of heavy strap molasses or a very heavy cream. It is eaten by rolling it up on one or two fingers and sucking it from them. It accordingly offers no resistance to the process of mastication. In the districts where the natives are living on native foods, the incidence of dental caries was only 2% of the teeth, whereas among those natives who are living in large part on the imported foods, chiefly white flour and sweetened goods, 37.3% of the teeth had been attacked by tooth decay. Typical Hawaiian faces are seen in Figure 37. Typical modern tooth decay is shown in Figure 38. This girl has tuberculosis also. Figure 37. Wherever the Polynesians are being modernized, a change is occurring in facial form which is progressively more severe in the younger members of the family. These girls of an Hawaiian family demonstrate this. Note the change in facial form in the sister to the right. The face is longer and narrower, the nostrils pinched and the chin is receding. The tribal facial pattern is lost. Figure 38. The Polynesian race is rapidly disappearing with modernization. Tooth decay becomes extreme as shown in the girl above. This girl has tuberculosis, one of the physical injuries which accompany modernization. This is one of the bodily injuries, as we will see later. The study of the incidence of dental caries in these various South Sea island groups in its relation to diet was only one of several of the problems investigated. Since nutrition is the principal factor that has been found related to the R6 law of immunity and susceptibility to dental caries in my previous field studies, the collection of foods for chemical analysis and the gathering of detailed data regarding the articles of diet have been very important phases of the activities of this group of studies. Data were collected for relating the incidence of irregularities of the teeth and dental arches to the types of nutrition. Similarly, studies were made of the individuals who had been hospitalized, in the few places where hospitals existed, chiefly to obtain data regarding the classification of the individuals who were suffering from tuberculosis. These were similar to the studies that I have made among the Eskimos and Indians of Alaska and northern and central Canada. If one will picture a community of several thousand people with an average of 30% of all the teeth attacked by dental caries and not a single dentist or dental instrument available for assistance of the entire group, a slight realization is had of the mass suffering that has to be endured. Commerce and trade for profit blaze the way in breaking down isolation's barriers, far in advance of the development of health agencies and emergency relief unwittingly made necessary by the trade contact. While dental caries was most active in the periods of systematic overloads, such as growth, gestation and lactation, even the splendidly formed teeth of the adult men were wrecked by dental caries when the native foods were displaced with modern foods. In all of the groups living on native foods with a liberal intake of animal life of the sea, the health of the gums was generally excellent. When, however, the seafoods were quite limited in the dietary, heavy deposits formed and often were associated with a marked destruction of the supporting tissues with gingival infection. This condition was particularly prevalent among all groups near the ports, when the groups were displacing part of their native foods with imported foods. In American Samoa, through the cooperation of the educational authorities and the director of the Department of Health, Commander Stevenson, and under the direct supervision of Lieutenant Commander Lowry, the dental surgeon, a group of 4 young men of the native teaching staff was selected and given instructions for the removal of the deposits. Equipment in the form of instruments has since been provided, in part through the kindness and generosity of some dental manufacturers. This probably constitutes the only native dental service that has ever been available in any of the Pacific Island groups. The intelligence and aptness with which these men were able to learn the fundamental principles, and their skill in carrying out a highly commendable prophylactic operation was indeed remarkable. I gave them pieces of soap and asked them to carve a reproduction of an extracted tooth which was given as a model and in which they were required to increase all diameters to a given amount. Their work would probably equal if not exceed in excellence that of the first effort of 90% of American dental students. Many of these natives are very dexterous with their fingers and are skilled artists in carving wood and other material. A great service could be rendered to these people who are in the process of modernization, but who have no opportunity for dental assistance. by teaching some of the bright young men certain of the procedures for rendering first aid. They could be compensated by contributions of native foods and native wares, much as our itinerant dentists were in earlier days. The people would not have money to pay an American or European dentist for his service until trade is carried on with currency. Nearly all these racial stocks are magnificent singers for which nature has well equipped them physically. Their artistry can be judged by the fact that they sing very difficult music unaccompanied and undirected. A large native chorus at Nuku'alofa, in the Tongan group, sang without accompaniment, the Hallelujah Chorus, from Handel's Messiah, with all the parts and with phenomenal volume and modulation. Much of their work, such as rowing their largest boats, and many of their sports are carried out to the rhythm of hilarious music. Many of the island groups recognize that their races are doomed, since they are melting away with degenerative diseases, chiefly tuberculosis. Their one overwhelming desire is that their race shall not die out. They know that something serious has happened since they have been touched by civilization. Surely our civilization is on trial both at home and abroad. The nutrition of the primitive Polynesians is continually reinforced with animal life from the sea, which includes both soft and hard shell forms. The incidence of tooth decay varied from 6% for the most isolated groups to 33.4% for the modernized groups. Those individuals living in their native environment on their native foods have universally normal facial and dental arch form, reproducing the characteristics of the race. Those living on the normal environment, except for using the imported foods of white flour, sugar, sugar products, syrup, polished rice, and the like, have in the succeeding generations marked changes in facial and dental arch forms. Chapter 9: Isolated and Modernized African Tribes. Africa has been the last of the large continents to be invaded and explored by our modern civilization. It has one of the largest native populations still living in accordance with inherited traditions. Accordingly, it provides a particularly favorable field for studying primitive racial stocks. This study of primitive racial stocks, with the exception of some Indian groups, has been largely concerned with people living under physical conditions quite different from those which obtain in the central area of a large continent. Seafoods are within reach of the inhabitants of islands and coastal regions regardless of latitude. The inhabitants of the interior of a continent, however, have not access to liberal supplies of various forms of animal life of the sea. It was important, therefore, in the interest of the inhabitants of the United States, Canada, Europe, and other large continental interiors, to study primitive people living under environments similar to theirs. Africa is one of the few countries that can provide both primitive living conditions and the modern life of the plains and plateau country in the interior. The Great Plateau of Eastern and Central Africa has nurtured a score of tribes with superb physiques and much accumulated wisdom. We are concerned to know how they have accomplished this, and whether they or any other people can survive in that environment after adopting the formulas of our modern civilizations. Considering that the most universal scourge of modern civilization is dental caries, though it is only one of its many degenerative processes, it is important that we study these people to note how they have solved the major problems of living in so severe and disciplining an environment as provided in Africa. This was done during the summer of 1935. Our route took us through the Red Sea and down the Indian Ocean to enter the African continent at Mombasa below the equator, and then across Kenya and Uganda into eastern Belgian Congo, and thence about 4,000 miles down the long stretch of the Nile through Sudan to the modernized civilization of Egypt. This journey covered most of the country around Ethiopia and gave us contact with several of the most primitive racial stocks of that country. These people are accordingly the neighbors of the Abyssinians or Ethiopians. Since the various tribes speak different languages and are under different governments, it was necessary to organize our safari in connection with the local government officials in the different districts. During these journeys in Africa, which covered about 6,000 miles, We came in contact with about 30 different tribes. Special attention was given to the foods, samples of which were obtained for chemical analysis. Over 2,500 negatives were made and developed in the field. If any one impression of our experiences were to be selected as particularly vivid, it would be the contrast between the health and ruggedness of the primitives in general and that of the foreigners who have entered their country. That their superior ruggedness was not racial became evident when through contact with modern civilizations degenerative processes developed. Very few of the many Europeans with whom we came in contact had lived in Central Africa for as much as 2 years without serious illness or distinct evidence of physical stress. That the cause was not the severity of the climate, but something related to the methods of living, was soon apparent. In all the districts it was recognized and expected that the foreigners must plan to spend a portion of every few years or every year outside that environment if they would keep well. Children born in that country to Europeans were generally expected to spend several of their growing years in Europe or America if they would build even relatively normal bodies. One exacting condition of the environment that we encountered was the constant exposure to disease. Dysentery epidemics were so severe and frequent that we scarcely allowed ourselves to eat any food that had not been cooked or that we had not peeled ourselves. In general, it was necessary to boil all drinking water. We dared not allow our bare feet to touch a floor of the ground for fear of jiggers which burrow into the skin of the feet. Scarcely ever when below 6,000 feet were we safe after sundown to step from behind mosquito netting or to go out without thorough protection against the malaria pests. These malaria mosquitoes, which include many varieties, are largely night feeders. They were thought to come out soon after sundown. We were advised that the most dangerous places for becoming infected were the public eating houses, since the mosquitoes hide under the tables and attack the diners' ankles if they are not adequately protected. We rigidly followed the precaution of providing adequate protection against these pests. Disease-carrying ticks were so abundant in the grass and shrubbery that we had to be on guard constantly to remove them from our clothing before they buried themselves in our flesh. They were often carriers of very severe fevers. We had to be most careful not to touch the hides with which the natives protected their bodies from the cold at night and from the sun in the daytime without thorough sterilization following any contact. There was grave danger from the lice that infected the hair of the hides. We dared not enter several districts because of the dreaded tsetse fly and the sleeping sickness it carries. One wonders at the apparent health of the natives until he learns of the unique immunity they have developed and which is largely transmitted to the offspring. In several districts we were told that practically every living native had had typhus fever and was immune, though the lice from their bodies could transmit the disease. One also wonders why people with such resistance to disease are not able to combat the degenerative diseases of modern civilization. When they adopt modern civilization, they then become susceptible to several of our modern degenerative processes, including tooth decay. Dr. Anderson, who is in charge of a splendid government hospital in Kenya, assured me that in several years of service among the primitive people of that district he had observed that they did not suffer from appendicitis, gallbladder trouble, cystitis and duodenal ulcer. Malignancy was also very rare among the primitives. It is of great significance that we studied 6 tribes in which there appeared to be not a single tooth attacked by dental caries nor a single malformed dental arch. Several other tribes were found with nearly complete immunity to dental caries. In 13 tribes we did not meet a single individual with irregular teeth. Where the members of these same tribes had adopted modern civilization, many cases of tooth decay were found. In the next generation following the adoption of the European dietaries, dental arch deformities frequently developed. We are concerned to know something of the origin of these people, including the Ethiopians, and to what extent racial ancestry has protected them. If we refer to an ethnographic map of African races, we find there is evidence of a great movement northward from South Africa. These people had some things in common with the Melanesians and Polynesians of the South Pacific whom we studied the year previously. Their language carries some words of similar meaning. While there are many tribes existing today, it is of significance that they each possess some identifying characteristics of language, dress and food habits. Another great racial movement has apparently moved southward from northern Africa. These tribes are of Hamitic origin and include Nilotic tribes and Abyssinians. The Nilotic tribes have a distinct physical pattern and mode of life. These great racial movements have met in the Upper Nile region of eastern Africa near the equator, and have swayed back and forth with successive obliteration or absorption of those tribes that were least sturdy. The Negro race occupied an area across Africa from the west to Central Africa. They were exposed to the aggression and oppression of these two great racial movements, resulting often in intermingling in various proportions of racial bloods. The Semitic race, chiefly Arabs, occupied Arabia and a great area in northern Africa. In this bird's-eye view we are observing changes that have been in progress during many hundreds or thousands of years. The Arabs have been the principal slave dealers working in from the east coast of Africa. They have maintained their individuality without much blending except on the coast. They have not become an important part of the native stock of the interior. These primitive native stocks can be largely identified on the basis of their habits and methods of living. The Nilotic tribes have been chiefly herders of cattle and goats and have lived primarily on dairy products, including milk and blood, with some meat, and with a varying percentage of vegetable foods. It was most interesting to observe that in every instance these cattle people dominated the surrounding tribes. They were characterized by superb physical development, great bravery and a mental acumen that made it possible for them to dominate because of their superior intelligence. Among these Nilotic tribes the Maasai forced their way farthest south and occupy a position between two of the great Atbanta tribes, the Kika and the Wakamba. Both of these latter tribes are primarily agricultural people. Maasai tribe. The Maasai are tall and strong. Figure 39 shows a typical Bel, also a Maasai man who is much taller than our 6-foot guide. It is interesting to study the methods of living and observe the accumulated wisdom of the Maasai. They are reported to have known for over 200 years that malaria was carried by mosquitoes, and further they have practiced exposing the members of their tribes who had been infected with syphilis by the Arabs to malaria to prevent the serious injuries resulting from the spirochetal infection. Yet modern medicine boasts of being the discoverers of this great principle of using malaria to prevent or relieve syphilitic infections of the spinal cord and brain. Fig 39. These members of the Maasai tribe illustrate the splendid nutrition provided by their diet of cattle products, namely, meat, milk and blood. The chief beside our guide is well over 6 feet. This Maasai Bel wears the customary decorations of coils of copper wire bracelets and anklets which largely constitute the attire of the girls. I saw the native Maasai operating on their cattle with skill and knowledge. The Maasai have no currency and all their transactions are made with cows or goats. A valuable cow was not eating properly, and I observed them taking a thorn out of the inside of her mouth. The surgical operation was done with a knife of their own making and tempered by pounding. The wound was treated by rubbing it with the ashes of a plant that acted as a very powerful styptic. Their knowledge of veterinary science is quite remarkable. I saw them treating a young cow that had failed to conceive. They apparently knew the cause and proceeded to treat her as modern veterinaries might do in order to overcome her difficulties. For their food throughout the centuries they have depended very largely on milk, meat and blood, reinforced with vegetables and fruits. They milk the cows daily and bleed the steers at regular intervals by a unique process. In figure 40 we see a native Maasai with his bow and arrow, the latter tipped with a sharp knife which is guarded by a shoulder to determine the depth to which the arrow may enter the vein. If the animal is sufficiently tame, the blood is drawn while it is standing. If the animal is frightened it is quickly hobbled, as shown below. In this figure the stream of blood may be seen spurting from the jugular vein into a gourd which holds about a gallon. A torque is placed around the neck before the puncture is made. The animals did not even flinch when struck by the arrow. The operation is done so quickly and skillfully. When sufficient blood was drawn, the torque was removed and the blood immediately stopped flowing. A styptic made of ashes referred to above was used. This serves also to protect the wound from infection. The blood is defibrinated by whipping in the gourd. The fibrin is fried or cooked much as bacon or meat would be prepared. The defibrinated blood is used raw just as the milk is, except in smaller quantities. When available, each growing child receives a day's ration of blood, as does each pregnant or lactating woman. Formerly, the warriors used this food exclusively. These three sources, milk, blood and meat, provide them with liberal supplies of bodybuilding minerals and the special vitamins, both fat-soluble and water-soluble. Their estimate of a desirable dairy stock is based on quality, not quantity. They judge the value of a cow for keeping in their herd by the length of time it takes her calf to stand on its feet and run after it is born, which is only a very few minutes. This is in striking contrast with the practice of our modern dairymen, who are chiefly concerned with the quantity of milk and quantity of butter fat rather than with its value as a source of special factors for nutrition. Many of the calves of the modern high-production cows of civilized countries are not able to stand for many hours after birth, frequently 24. This ability to stand is very important in a country infested with predatory animals, such as lions, leopards, hyenas, jackals and vultures. Figure 40. An important source of fat-soluble vitamins during the drought period is the blood of the steers, which is drawn about every 30 days. Above shows the lance-tipped arrow being shot into the neck vein. If the animal is wild, it is hobbled as shown below, where the stream of blood is seen spurting into the gourd. The flow ceases when the compress is removed. This reminded me of my experience in Alaska in studying the reindeer of the Eskimos. I was told that a reindeer calf could be dropped in a foot of snow and almost immediately it could run with such speed that the predatory animals, including wolves, could not catch it. And, moreover, that these fawns would go almost immediately after their birth with the herd on a stampede and never be knocked down. The problem of combating the predatory animals, particularly the lions, calls for greater skill and bravery than is required by other tribes in Africa. The lions live on the large grazing animals, particularly the cattle, from which they select the strongest. In driving over the veldt we frequently saw one or two men or boys guarding an entire herd with only their spears. Their skill in killing a lion with a spear is one of the most superb of human achievements. I was interested to learn that they much prefer their locally made spears to those that are manufactured outside and brought in, because of their certainty that they will not break, will withstand straightening regardless of how much they are bent, and because due to the process of manufacture will take a very sharp edge. On one occasion, after we had been kept awake much of the night by the roaring of the lions and neighing of the zebras that were being attacked by the lions, we visited a Maasai manyatta nearby in the morning to learn that when they let their cattle and goats out of the corral of acacia thorns, 3 or 4 sportsmen went ahead in search of the lions that might be waiting to ambush the cattle. They apparently did not have the slightest fear. The lions evidently had made a kill nearby. This the natives determined by the number of coyotes. The heart and courage of these people has been largely broken by the action of the government in taking away their shields in order to prevent them pillaging the surrounding native tribes as formerly. They depended upon their shields to protect them from the arrows of the other tribes. The efforts to make agriculturists of these Maasai people are not promising. In a typical manyatta the chief has several wives. Each one has a separate dwelling. Timber and shrubbery are so scarce in this vicinity that the dwellings are built of clay mixed with cow dung, which is plastered over a framework of twigs. Many chiefs are over 6 feet in height. The Maasai live in a very extensive game preserve in which hundreds of thousands of grazing animals enjoy an existence protected from man, since even the natives are not allowed to kill the animals as formerly. They seemed to be preserved for the numerous lions which occasionally become very bold, since they have an abundance of food and no enemies. Recently the local government authorities found it necessary to shoot off 80 of the lions in a particular district because of their aggressiveness. In the Maasai tribe, a study of 2,516 teeth in 88 individuals distributed through several widely separated manyatas showed only 4 individuals with caries. These had a total of 10 carious teeth, or only 0.4% of the teeth attacked by tooth decay. Kika tribe, Kanzbu, Kenya. In contrast with the Maasai, the Kika tribe, which inhabits a district to the west and north of the Maasai, are characterized by being primarily an agricultural people. Their chief articles of diet are sweet potatoes, corn, beans, and some bananas, millet, and kaffir corn, a variety of Indian millet. The women use special diets during gestation and lactation. The girls in this tribe, as in several others, are placed on a special diet for 6 months prior to marriage. They nurse their children for 3 harvests and precede each pregnancy with special feeding. The Kikayas are not as tall as the Maasai and physically they are much less rugged. Like many of the Central African tribes, they remove some lower incisors at the time these permanent teeth erupt. This custom is reported to have been established for the purpose of feeding the individuals in case of lockjaw. One of the striking tribal customs is the making of large perforations in the ears in which they carry many metal ornaments. A typical Kika woman is shown in figure 41, upper right. Typical Kika men are also shown in figure 41. Note their fine teeth and dental arches. Figure 41. The development of the faces and dental arches in many African tribes is superb. The girl at the upper right is wearing several earrings in the lobe of each ear. The Wakamba tribe points the teeth as shown below. This does not cause tooth decay while they live on their native food. A study of 1,041 teeth in 33 individuals showed 57 teeth with caries, or 5.5%. These were 36.4% of the individuals affected. Much of the territory occupied by the Kiki tribes was formerly forest. Their practice has been to burn down a section of forest in order to get new lands for planting. As soon as the virgin fertility is exhausted, which is usually in 3 to 5 years, they burn down another section of forest. By this process they have largely denuded their section of Kenya of its timber. This has resulted in a great waste of building material. There are few stands of native forest within easy reach of transportation. Wakamba tribe, Kenya. The Wakamba tribe point their teeth as shown in figure 41. They occupy the territory to the east of the Maasai, who in past centuries have driven themselves as a wedge between the Kika and the Wakamba tribes. The Maasai until checked carried on a relentless warfare, consisting largely of raids, in which they slaughtered the men and carried off the women and children and drove away the cattle or goats. The Wakambas are intellectually superior to the Kikayas and have distinct artistic skill in the carving of art objects. They are mechanical and like machinery. Many of them have important positions in the shops of the Kenya and Uganda Railway. An examination of 1,112 teeth of 37 individuals showed 69 teeth with caries, or 6.2%. 21.6% of the individuals studied had dental caries. Jalu tribe, Kenya. This tribe occupies the territory along Lake Victoria and Kisumu Bay. They are one of the most intelligent and physically excellent native tribes. They were studied into groups, one at Masno, and the other at Ogedo. The groups studied at the Masno school were boys ranging from about 10 years to 22, totaling about 190 in all. The principal of the school presented the boys in military formation for inspection. Through him as interpreter I asked that all boys who had ever had toothache hold up their hands, and 19 did so. Of the 19 only one individual was found to have caries, 2 of his teeth were involved, which, out of 546 teeth for these individuals, gives 0.4% of the teeth with caries. In the Uganda mission, a study of 258 teeth for 10 individuals revealed no teeth affected with dental caries. Jeans School, Kenya. This school is located at Kibet. It is an institution where young married couples are trained in domestic science, agriculture, and similar subjects. In 388 teeth of 13 individuals, 31 teeth were found to have been attacked by dental caries, or 7.9%. These were in 6 individuals. Pumwani Mission School, Kenya. This is a native suburb of Nairobi, and there the people have come under the influence of recent European contact. In an examination of 588 teeth of 21 individuals, 26 teeth had caries, or 4.4%. C. M. S. School, Nakuru, Kenya. The children of this school belong to several tribes, chiefly Jalu. In a study of 312 teeth of 11 individuals, only 1 tooth was found to have been attacked by tooth decay, or 0.3%. Chuya at Kisnu, Kenya. The natives of this district belong to the Maragali tribe. They are very strong and physically well developed. They live within easy reach of Lake Victoria, from which they obtain large quantities of fish, which constitutes an important part of their diet, together with cereals and sweet potatoes. A study of 552 teeth of 19 individuals revealed only 1 tooth with dental caries, or 0.2%. Muima tribe or Ankla, Uganda. This tribe resides in southern Uganda. They, like the Maasai, are primarily cattle-raising people and live on milk, blood and meat. The district in which they live is to the east of Lake Edward and the Mountains of the Moon. They constitute one of the very primitive and undisturbed groups. While the Maasai raise chiefly the humpbacked cattle, the herds of this Muima or Ankla tribe are characterized by their large widespread horns. Like the Maasai, they are tall and courageous. They defend their herds and their families from lions and leopards with their primitive spears. Like the other primitive cattle people, they dominate the adjoining tribes. In a study of 1,040 teeth of 37 individuals, not a single tooth was found with dental caries. This tribe makes their huts of grass and sticks. Watasi tribe. This is a very interesting tribe living on the east of Lake Kivu, one of the headwaters of the West Nile in Rwanda, which is a Belgian protectorate. They are tall and athletic. Their faces differ markedly from those of other tribes, and they boast a very noble inheritance. According to legend, a Roman military expedition penetrated into Central Africa at the time of Antony and Cleopatra. A phalanx remained, refusing to return with the expedition. They took wives from the native tribes and passed laws that thereafter no marriage could take place outside their group. They have magnificent physiques. Many stand over 6 feet without shoes. Several of the tribes neighboring Ethiopia are agriculturists and grow corn, beans, millet, sweet potatoes, bananas, kefir corn, and other grains, as their chief articles of food. Physically they are not as well built as either the tribes using dairy products liberally or those using fish from the freshwater lakes and streams. They have been dominated because they possess less courage and resourcefulness. The government of Kenya has for several years sponsored an athletic contest among the various tribes, the test being one of strength for which they use a tug-of-war. One particular tribe has carried off the trophy repeatedly. This tribe resides on the east coast of Lake Victoria and lives very largely on fish. The members are powerful athletes and wonderful swimmers. They are said not to have been conquered in warfare when they could take the warfare to the water. One of their methods is to swim underwater to the enemy's fleet and scuttle their boats. They fight with spears underwater with marvelous skill. Their physiques are magnificent. In a group of 190 boys who had been gathered into a government school near the east coast of Lake Victoria, only 1 boy was found with dental caries, and 2 of his teeth had been affected. The people dry the fish which are carried far inland. Uganda, which lies to the north and west of Lake Victoria and west of Kenya, is high and although on the equator, has an equitable climate with an abundance of native foods. 2 crops per year are produced, and many varieties of bananas grow wild. The Buganda tribe, Uganda, is the chief tribe of this region. Uganda has been called the Garden of Eden of Africa because of its abundance of plant foods, chiefly bananas and sweet potatoes, and because of its abundance of freshwater fish and animal life. The natives are thrifty and mentally superior to those of most other districts. They have a king and a native parliament which the British government recognizes and entrusts with local administrative affairs. A typical group was studied in a mission at Masaka. An examination of 664 teeth of 21 individuals revealed only 3 teeth with caries, or 0.4%. West Nile laborers from the Belgian Congo. The West Nile laborers studied at Masaka represent a very strong and dependable group. They come from districts north of Lake Albert and Belgian Congo. They are much sought for in industrial enterprises and are often moved in groups for a considerable distance. A study of 984 teeth of 31 individuals revealed that only 3 teeth had ever been attacked by tooth decay, or 0.3%. Only 1 individual had dental caries. As one travels down the West Nile and later along the western border of Ethiopia, many unique tribes are met. A typical Negroid type of the Upper Nile region is shown in Figure 42. Members of these tribes wear little or no clothing. They have splendid physiques and high immunity to dental caries. Figure 42. The reward of obeying nature's laws of nutrition is illustrated in this West Nile tribe in Belgian Congo. Note the breadth of the dental arches and the finely proportioned features. Their bodies are as well built as their heads. Exceedingly few teeth have been attacked by dental caries while on their native foods. After the confluence of the White Nile and West Nile, the former draining Lake Victoria and the Uganda Lakes through Uganda, and the latter, Lakes Kivu, Edwards and Albert and eastern Belgian Congo, the volume of water moving northward is very large. A unique obstruction to navigation has developed due to the fact that the Nile runs underground for a considerable distance. In this district vegetation is rank and prolific, including large quantities of water plants which form islands that are often attached temporarily to the shore. The water carries large quantities of alluvia which furnish an abundance of nutriment to the floating plant life. Accordingly, in many of these floating islands a large quantity of soil is enmeshed in the plant roots. At some period in the past the river became bridged across in Upper Sudan near its southern border. With the progressive addition of new material, a large natural bridge has been raised on which trees are now growing, and across which are elephant trails. This and a series of rapids require a detour of over 100 miles. The elephants are so plentiful in this district that both in Uganda and Sudan the governments have been required to send in special hunters to reduce the herds. In one district in Uganda 200 were said to have been slaughtered. They are very destructive to banana plantations. They break the banana trees over or pull them up by the roots and eat the succulent heart as well as the fruits. In a night a herd may destroy an entire plantation. The only people in the districts who are permitted to kill the elephants without license are the pygmies. They are also the only ones not required to pay a head tax. There are many tribes of them in the Great Forest area in Belgian Congo and Uganda. Their skill with spears is remarkable and they are able to kill an elephant while the animal remains unaware of his danger. It takes them 1 to 2 days to hamstring an elephant by working stealthily from behind, always keeping out of the elephant's sight. Although an elephant can scent a human for a long distance, these pygmies can disguise themselves so completely that the elephant is unaware of their presence. After disabling him by cutting the tendons of both hind legs, they attack him openly and, while one attracts his attention, the other slowly but progressively hacks off his trunk. In this manner he bleeds to death. They are particularly fond of elephant meat and a slaughter means a great feast. While we were in one of the pygmy colonies, two of them brought in the tusks of an elephant they had just killed. We had the rare opportunity of witnessing the celebration in the colony, which included the special reproduction in pantomime of the attack and method of killing the elephant. The pygmy mother of these two men is shown in figure 43, lower half. It will be noticed that she is a full head shorter than Mrs. Price, who is 5 feet 3 inches tall. This rugged, though small, woman is the mother of 5 grown men, 2 of whom are shown in figure 43 with the tusks of the elephant. Note their homemade spears. As marksmen with bows and arrows and as trappers, these pygmies have wonderful skill. Their arrows are tipped with iron of their own manufacture and have receptacles for carrying drugs which they extract from plants. These drugs temporarily paralyze the animals. For animals which they wish to destroy, the arrows carry a poison which rapidly produces death. The home life of the pygmies in the forest is often filled with danger. Just before our arrival, 2 babies had been carried off by a leopard. This stealthy night prowler is one of the most difficult animals to combat and probably has been one of the reasons the pygmies built cabins in the trees. Ordinarily their homes are built on the ground in a little clearing in the big forest. They consist of low shelters covered with banana leaves and other plants, built over a framework. The native missionary dispensed our gift of salt, which is one of their most prized gifts. They put on a dance for us. Figure 43. The pygmies of Belgian Congo are expert hunters. The 2 young men in the center above have slain single-handed the large bull elephant whose tusks they are holding. The spears used are shown. They are 2 of 5 grown sons of the pygmy mother standing next to Mrs. Price in the lower picture. Their teeth are excellent and their knowledge of foods unique. Pygmies, Ituri Forest, Belgian Congo. These people are said to have originally lived in the trees and they were exceedingly shy and difficult to contact. We were taken to several of their villages in the heart of the dense Ituri forest. We found them very well disposed through the confidence that has been established by the mission workers. Their shyness, however, together with the difficulty of making them understand through to transfuse of languages, made an examination of their teeth very difficult. A study of 352 teeth of 12 individuals revealed 8 teeth had been attacked by tooth decay, or 2.2%. The native tribes of Africa have depended to a great extent on freshwater fish from the numerous lakes and rivers for certain of their essential food factors. After being dried in the sun, these fish are carried long distances into the interior. The Nile perch grows frequently to a weight of 150 pounds. The natives of Africa know that certain insects are very rich in special food values at certain seasons, also that their eggs are valuable foods. A fly that hatches in enormous quantities in Lake Victoria is gathered and used fresh and dried for storage. They also use ant eggs and ants. Nyankan Mission, Ionu, Belgian Congo. This group is made up of members of the Baima, Babira, Ala and Balendu tribes. We will consider the representatives of these different tribes collectively since they live largely on a common dietary consisting chiefly of cereals. Only the Baimas of this group have small herds of cattle. Some of the others have a few goats. This district is located southwest of Lake Albert. A study of 6,461 teeth of 217 individuals revealed 390 teeth with dental caries, or 6%. 38 7/10% of the individuals suffered from dental caries. Bogora Mission, Belgian Congo. This mission is located west of Lake Albert and includes members of the Baima and Balendu tribes. While the Baima tribe originally lived very largely on cattle products, milk, blood and meat, in this district, the herds were small and they were using a considerable quantity of cereals, chiefly corn and beans, some sweet potatoes and bananas. These latter were the chief foods of the other tribes, in addition to goat's milk. An examination of 2,196 teeth of 77 individuals revealed 160 teeth with caries, or 7.2%. 53% of the individuals had caries. Kasenyi Port, Lake Albert, Belgian Congo. These natives were members of several tribes surrounding this district who were for the most part temporary residents as laborers. The people had been living largely on a cereal diet and now during their temporary residence at the port had had fish. An examination of 1,940 teeth of 63 individuals revealed 120 teeth with dental caries, or 6.1% of the teeth. 50.8% of the individuals had dental caries. Wanan tribe, Belgian Congo. This tribe is located at Lubera in Belgian Congo. Their diet consists largely of bananas, sweet potatoes, cereals and goat's milk. In an examination of 368 teeth of 13 individuals, there were 8 teeth with caries, or 2.2%. 15.4% of the individuals were affected. Baita tribe, Nyange, Rwanda, Belgian Protectorate. This district lies south of Uganda and east of Belgian Congo proper, northwest of Tanganyika. It lies just east of Lake Kivu. When we learn that Lake Kivu was only discovered in 1894, even though it is one of the important sources of the Nile waters, we realize the primitiveness of the people of this and adjoining districts. This group lives largely on dairy products from cattle and goats, together with sweet potatoes, cereals and bananas. In a study of 364 teeth of 13 individuals, not a single tooth was found to have been attacked by dental caries. Native hotel staff at Goina, Belgian Congo. This group consisted of the inside and outside servants of a tourist hotel on Lake Kivu. An examination of 320 teeth of 10 individuals revealed 20 teeth with caries, or 6.3%. It is significant that all of these carious teeth were in the mouth of one individual, the cook. The others all boarded themselves and lived on native diets. The cook used European foods. Whether members of the African tribes had attached themselves to coffee plantations and were provided with the imported foods of white flour, sugar, Polish rice and canned goods, tooth decay became rampant. This is typically illustrated in Figure 44. Figure 44. Wherever the Africans have adopted the foods of modern commerce, dental caries was active, thus destroying large numbers of the teeth and causing great suffering. The cases shown here are typical of workers on plantations which largely use imported foods. Anglo-Egyptian Sudan has an area approximately 1/3 that of the United States. It is traversed throughout its length from south to north by the Nile. There are several tribes living along this great waterway, which are of special interest now owing to their close proximity to Ethiopia. There are wonderful hunters and warriors among them. In hunting they use their long-bladed spears almost entirely. The shores of the Nile for nearly 1,000 miles in this district are lined with papyrus and other water plants to a depth of from several hundred yards to a few miles. Back of this area the land rises and provides excellent pasturage for the grazing cattle. These tribes, therefore, use milk, blood and meat from cattle and large quantities of animal life from the Nile River. Some of the tribes are very tall, particularly the Ners. The women are often 6 feet or over, and the men 7 feet, some of them reaching 7.5 feet in height. I was particularly interested in their food habits both because of their high immunity to dental caries which approximated 100%, and because of their physical development. I learned that they have a belief which to them is their religion, namely, that every man and woman has a soul which resides in the liver and that a man's character and physical growth depend upon how well he feeds that soul by eating the livers of animals. The liver is so sacred that it may not be touched by human hands. It is accordingly always handled with their spear or saber, or with specially prepared forked sticks. It is eaten both raw and cooked. Many of these tribes, like the Ners, wear no clothing and decorate their bodies with various designs, some of them representing strings of beads produced by putting foreign substances under the skin in definite order. They have maintained a particularly bitter warfare against the Arab slave dealers who have come across from the Red Sea coast to carry off the women and children. In isolated districts even to this day they are suspicious of foreigners. We were told that in one district adjoining Ethiopia all light-skinned people are in danger and cannot safely enter the territory without a military escort. Tere Iska, Upper Nile, Sudan. These people are tall and live largely on fish and other animal life. This part of Sudan consists of many districts of great marshland called the Sud. It is covered with rank papyrus to the height of 15 to 30 feet. This jungle of rank marsh growth swarms with a wide variety of animal life, large and small. An examination of 548 teeth of 18 individuals revealed that not a single tooth had been attacked by dental caries, or 100% immunity. Nurs, Malak, Sudan. The Nurs at Malak on the Nile River are a unique tribe because of their remarkable stature. Many of the women are 6 feet tall and the men range from 6 feet to 7.5 feet in height. Their food consists very largely of animal life of the Nile, dairy products, milk and blood from the herds. A study of 1,268 teeth of 39 individuals revealed only 6 teeth with dental caries, or 0.5%. Only 3 individuals had caries, or 7.7%. Dinkas, Jebel, Sudan. This tribe lives on the Nile. Its members are not as tall as the Nurs. They are physically better proportioned and have greater strength. They use fish from the Nile and cereals for their diet. They decorate their bodies profusely with scars. An examination of 592 teeth of 22 individuals revealed only 1 tooth with caries, or 0.2%. Arab schools at Khartoum and Omdurman, Sudan. The Arabs are the chief occupants of the territory of northern Sudan. Omdurman on the west bank of the White Nile opposite Khartoum is the largest purely Arab city in the world. It has been but slightly influenced by modern civilization. Khartoum, on the contrary, just across the river from Omdurman and the capital of Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, has districts which are typically modern. These include the government offices and administration organization. The Arab section of Khartoum has been definitely influenced by contact with the Europeans. This makes possible a comparative study of similar groups in the two cities, modernized Khartoum and primitive Omdurman. A study of 1,284 teeth of 52 individuals in an Arab school at Khartoum revealed that 59 teeth or 4.7% had been attacked by dental caries, or 44.2% of the individuals studied. In Omdurman, a study of 744 teeth in 31 individuals revealed only 9 teeth that had been attacked by tooth decay, or 1.2%. In this group only 2 or 6.4% of the individuals had dental caries. The groups examined were selected with the assistance of the government officials and consisted of the higher grade pupils in 2 advanced native schools, 1 in Khartoum and 1 in Omdurman. It is of interest that of the 2 boys in the Arab school at Omdurman with dental caries, 1 was the son of a rich merchant and used liberally sweets and European foods. Native Hospital, Khartoum, Sudan. The individuals studied in this institution were from quite remote areas distributed through Sudan. Some had traveled many days on camels to obtain the help that the hospital provided. A study of 288 teeth of 10 individuals revealed that 13 had been attacked by tooth decay, or 4.5%. Ikhlas School, Cairo, Egypt. This is a native school in which the individuals are comparable in many respects to those in the native schools at Khartoum and Omdurman. Their nutrition is highly modernized by living in a modern city. A study of 2,092 teeth of 85 individuals revealed that 353 teeth or 12.1% had been attacked by tooth decay. 75% of the individuals of this group had dental caries. The total number of teeth examined in the preceding groups was 28,438. Of this number, 1,346 were found with dental caries, or 4.7%. This represents a total of 1,002 individuals examined, of whom 300 had one or more carious teeth, or had lost teeth by caries, making 29.9% of the individuals with dental caries. Of this total number of individuals studied in 27 groups, there were several groups with practically complete immunity to dental caries, while other groups had relatively high incidence of that disease. Facial and dental arch deformities. The purpose of these studies has included the obtaining of data which will throw light also on the etiology of deformities of the dental arches and face, including irregularity of position of the teeth. A marked variation of the incidence of irregularities was found in the different tribes. This variation could be directly associated with the nutrition rather than with the tribal pattern. The lowest percentage of irregularity occurred in the tribes living very largely on dairy products and marine life. For example, among the Maasai living on milk, blood and meat, only 3.4% had irregularities. Among the Kiku and Wakamba, 18.2 and 18.9% respectively had irregularities. These people were largely agriculturists living primarily on vegetable foods. In the native Arab school at Omdurman, among the pupils living almost entirely according to the native customs of selection and preparation of foods, 6.4% had irregularities, while in the native school at modernized Khartoum 17% had irregularities. In the Ikhlas school at Cairo, under modern influence, 16.5% had irregularities. In the native hospital at Khartoum, 70% had irregularities. In the Pygmy group 33.3% had irregularities, and among the grain eaters of the West Nile, 25.5% had irregularities. The Jeans school had 46.1% and the Ogada mission 30%. While the primitive racial stocks of Africa developed normal facial and dental arch forms when on their native foods, several characteristic types of deformity frequently developed in the children of the modernized groups. One of the simplest forms, and one which corresponds with a very common deformity pattern in the United States, involves the dropping inward of the laterals with narrowing of the upper arch, making the incisors appear abnormally prominent and crowding the cuspids outside the line of the arch. Typical illustrations of this are shown in Figure 45. Where the nutritional deficiency is very severe, as at Mombasa on the coast, more severe changes in facial form are found. Figure 45. In the new generations, born after the parents had adopted typical modernized diets of Europeans, there was a marked change in the facial and dental arch forms of the adolescent children. Note the narrowing of the nostrils and dental arches and the crowding of the teeth in these four typical young men. Among the deformity patterns, a lack of development forward of the middle third of the face or of the lower third of the face often appeared in the more highly modernized groups. An illustration of the former is seen in Figure 46, upper left, and of the latter in Figure 46, lower left and right. In the girl at the upper left, the upper arch tends to go inside the lower arch all around. This girl is of the first generation, in a mission in Nairobi, following the adoption of the modernized foods by the parents. Figure 46. Disturbed nature may present a variety NF deformity patterns. In the upper left, the upper arch is much too small for the lower and nearly goes inside it. The upper right is narrowed with crowding of the teeth. Both lower cases demonstrate an underdevelopment of the mandible of the lower jaw. A more extreme and severe type of facial change involves an abnormal narrowing with marked distortion of both upper and lower arches. This is shown typically in Figure 47. Figure 47. As in our civilization, even the first generation, after the adoption of modernized foods, may show gross deformities. Note the extreme protrusion of the upper teeth with shortening of the lower jaw in the upper pictures and the marked narrowing with lengthening of the face in the lower views. The injury is not limited to the visible structures. These extreme deformities often produce facial expressions that are suggestive of the faces of some of the monkeys. This is illustrated by the three boys shown with the monkey in Figure 48. Figure 48. A very frequent injury appearing in the offspring after the adoption of less efficient foods often involves a marked depression of the middle third of the face as illustrated in the three boys in this view. Note the comparison with the chimpanzee face. The Arabs in several districts use camel's milk extensively. It is nutritious, and in much of the desert country constitutes the mainstay of the nomads for months at a time. The primitive Arabs studied had fine dental arches with very little deformity. Even the horses ridden by the Arab chiefs in moving their camel herds across the desert are often dependent, sometimes for as long as 3 months, upon the milk of the camels for their nutrition. Typical Arab faces and a camel caravan at rest are shown in Figure 49. The primitive Arab girls have splendidly developed faces and fine dental arches. Their natural beauty, however, is rapidly lost with modernization, as illustrated in Figure 50. Figure 49. In the hot desert countries of Asia and Africa, camel's milk is an important item of human nutrition. The teeth of the aras, as illustrated below, are excellent. Large areas could not maintain human life without the camel and its milk. Figure 50. Both girls and boys in the modernized colonies in Cairo showed typical deformity patterns in faces and dental arches. The health of these groups is not comparable to that of those living on the native dieteries. Reproductive efficiency in these generations is greatly reduced. Dr. Hadlicker has called attention to the occasional development in several racial stocks of individuals who travel on all fours instead of upright. I saw several individuals of this type in Africa scooting around about as rapidly as the dogs. They were, accordingly, difficult to photograph. 2 are shown in Figure 51. Figure 51. These 2 native African children scooted around on all fours so swiftly that it was difficult to take their pictures. We did not see them stand up. They behaved very much like tame chimpanzees. While slavery of the old form no longer exists in the so-called civilized countries, in its new form it is a most tragic reality for many of the people. Taxes and the new order of living make many demands. For many of these primitive tribes a new suit of clothes could formerly be had every day with no more trouble than cutting a new banana leaf. With the new order they are requested to cover their bodies with clothing. Cloth of all kinds including the poorest cotton has to be imported. They must pay an excessive charge due to the long transportation cost for the imported goods, a charge which often exceeds the original cost in the European or American markets by several-fold. In order to pay their head tax they are frequently required to carry such products as can be used by the government officials, chiefly foods, over long distances and for part of each year. These foods are often those which not only the adults, but particularly the growing children sorely need for providing body growth and repair. This naturally has produced a current of acute unrest and a chafing under the foreign domination. As we encircled Ethiopia we found the natives not only aware of what was going on in that border country, but deeply concerned regarding the outcome. From their temper and sympathetic attitude for the oppressed Ethiopians, it would not be surprising if sympathizers pass over the border into that country to support their crushed neighbors. The problem is accordingly very much larger than the interest of some particular foreign power. It deals directly with the future course of events and the attitude of the African natives in general toward foreign domination. The native African is not only chafing under the taxation by foreign overlords, but is conscious that his race becomes blighted when met by our modern civilization. I found them well aware of the fact that those of their tribes who had adopted European methods of living and foods not only developed rampant tooth decay, but other degenerative processes. In one of the most efficiently organized mission schools that we found in Africa, the principal asked me to help them solve a serious problem. He said there was no single question asked them so often by the native boys in their school as why it is that those families that have grown up in the mission or government schools were physically not so strong as those families who had never been in contact with the mission or government schools. These young men were thinking. I was even asked several times by them whether or not I thought that the native Africans must go the way of the Red Indians of America. The happiness of the people in their homes and community life is everywhere very striking. A mining prospector who had spent 2 decades studying the mineral deposits of Uganda was quoted to me as stating that if he could have the heaven of his choice in which to spend all eternity, it would be to live in Uganda as the natives of Uganda had lived before modern civilization came to it. While intertribal warfare has largely ceased, a new scourge is upon them, namely the scourge which comes with modern civilization. As in the primitive racial stocks previously studied and reported, we found that modernizing forces were often associated with a very marked increase of the death rate over the birth rate. In some districts in Africa a marked degeneration is taking place. Jeffrey Gora, in his book, Africa Dances, 1, which was written after making studies in West Africa, discusses this problem at length. He quotes figures given by Marcel Sauvage, 2, in his article on French Equatorial Africa. In 1911 French Equatorial Africa had 20 million Negro inhabitants, in 1921 there were 7.5 million, in 1931 there were 2.5 million. He states regarding the quotation, these figures were given in a responsible French conservative paper and have not been denied. Major Brown, a high official of the British Government Administrative Department of Kenya, with long experience, states in the closing paragraph of his book entitled, The Vanishing Tribes of Kenya, 3, the following. It must also be remembered that the blessings of civilization are not in practice by any means as obvious as some simple-minded folk would like to believe. It can be said with fair accuracy that among the tribes with which we have been dealing there is, in their uncontaminated society, no pauperism, no paid prostitution, very little serious drunkenness, and on the whole astonishingly little crime, while practically everyone has enough to eat, sufficient clothing, and an adequate dwelling, according to the primitive native standard. Of what civilized community can as much be said? Civilizations have been rising and falling not only through all the period of recorded history, but long before, as evidenced by archaeological findings. If we think of nature's calendar as one in which centuries are days and civilizations are years, the part current events are playing in the history of a great continent like Africa may be mere incidents. This much we do know, that throughout the world some remnants of several primitive racial stocks have persisted to this day, even in very exacting environments, and only by such could they have been protected. In my studies of these several racial stocks I find that it is not accident but accumulated wisdom regarding foods that lies behind their physical excellence and freedom from our modern degenerative processes, and, further, that on various sides of our world the primitive people know many of the things that are essential for life, things that our modern civilizations apparently do not know. These are the fundamental truths of life that have put them in harmony with nature through obeying her nutritional laws. Whence this wisdom? Was there in the distant past a world civilization that was better attuned to nature's laws, and have these remnants retained that knowledge? If this is not the explanation, it must be that these various primitive racial stocks have been able, through a superior skill in interpreting cause and effect, to determine for themselves what foods in their environment are best for producing human bodies with a maximum of physical fitness and resistance to degeneration. Primitive native races of Eastern and Central Africa have in their native state a very high immunity to dental caries, ranging from to less than 1% of the teeth affected for many of the tribes. Where modernized, however, the incidence increased to 12.1%. In the matter of facial deformity, 13 tribes out of 27 studied presented so high a standard of excellence that not a single individual in the group was found with deformed dental arches. Their nutrition varied according to their location, but always provided an adequate quantity of bodybuilding and repairing material. even though much effort was required to obtain some of the essential food factors. Many tribes practiced feeding girls special foods for an extended period before marriage. Spacing of children was provided by a system of plural wives. Chapter 10, Isolated and Modernized Australian Aborigines. Our problem of throwing light upon the cause of the physical breakdown of our modern civilization, with special consideration of tooth decay and facial deformity, requires a critical examination of individuals living in as wide a range of physical conditions as may be possible. This requires that the Aborigines of Australia be included in this examination of human reactions to physical environments. These were studied in 1936. In selecting the individuals in the various groups, special effort was made to include children between the ages of 10 and 16 years in order to have an opportunity to observe and record the condition of the dental arches after the permanent teeth had erupted. This was necessary because the deciduous dentition or first set of teeth may be in normal position in the arches with a correct relationship between the arches, and the permanent dentition show marked irregularity. The shape of the dental arches of the infant at birth and the teeth that are to take their place in the arches have considerable of their calcification at birth. The development of the adult face, however, does not occur until the permanent teeth have erupted. The general shape or pattern is largely influenced by the position and direction of the eruption of the permanent teeth. These studies, accordingly, have included a careful, detailed record of the shape of the dental arch of each individual. The Australian Aborigines constitute one of the most unique primitive races that have come out of the past into our modern times, and they are probably the oldest living race. We are particularly concerned with those qualities that have made possible their survival and cultural development. The Aborigines are of special interest because they have come out of a very distant past and are associated with animal life, which is unique in being characterized as a living museum preserved from the dawn of animal life on the Earth. Many of the animal species that are abundant in Australia are found only in fossil form on other continents. The evidence indicates that they crossed on a land bridge which connected Australia with Asia. After the bridge was submerged, the animals persisted in that protected island continent which never has known any of the animal species of later development. Among these animals the marsupials play an important role and constitute a large variety. The American continent has only one or two of the many forms found in Australia. These are the opossum of the marsupial family and the sloth. One of the most curious animals living on the Earth today, or that has left its remains in the petrified skeletons of early periods of the Earth's history, is the duckbill platypus. It has the unique distinction of having the characteristics of several animal species. It lays eggs like a bird and hatches them with the heat of its body in its pouch. It has webbed, five-toed feet, like the water birds, a bill like a duck and hair and tail like a beaver. The typical marsupial pouch for carrying its young is another characteristic of this strange animal. Like other mammals, it provides milk for its young. Its milk is similar in chemical constituents to that of other mammals. Most rudimentary in form are the mammary glands of the platypus. The young, when hatched in the pouch, nuzzle the lining membrane of the pouch and the milk exudes through minute openings. There is no nipple. The animal lives chiefly in the water. Its home is built above the water level on the bank, but the entrance to it is underneath the water. They are exceedingly playful creatures, apparently more at home in the water than on land. They live on both animal life and plant food found under the water. They seem to be related to an early era of differentiation of animal species. The Aborigines are credited with having the most primitive type of skeletal development of any race living today. The eyes are very deep set, the brows very prominent, giving them an expression that identifies them as a distinct racial type. See Figure 52. Professor Weidenreich has shown that they resemble in this regard the recently discovered ancient Peking man. While they are still in the Stone Age stage in their arts and crafts, they have developed further in some respects than has any other ancient race. Their skill in tracking and outwitting the fleet and very cunning animal life of their land is so remarkable that they have been accredited with a sixth sense. They have been able to build good bodies and maintain them in excellent condition in a country in which the plant life, and consequently the lower animal life, can be maintained at only a very low level because of the absence of rain. Over half of Australia has less than 10 inches of rain a year. It is significant that the natives have maintained a vigorous existence in districts in which the white population which expelled them is unable to continue to live. Among the white race there, the death rate approaches or exceeds the birth rate. Figure 52. The Aborigines of Australia are recognized to be the oldest living race of mankind. Note the prominent eyebrows and deep-set eyes. The man at the upper right is holding his spears and Waimara, or spear thrower. They are very fond of decorations on their bodies. Little baldness was seen even in the very old. They have developed a device for throwing spears, which makes them more deadly than any in the world. I witnessed a group of the present-day natives throwing their spears at a target which consisted of a banana stalk much smaller than a man's body. They threw the spears from a distance which I estimated to be 75 yards. About 30 spears were thrown and several pierced the banana stalk and the others were stuck in the ground close around it. This was accomplished by means of a Waimara or throwing stick approximately as long as the arm, with a strong hand grip at one end and a device on the other end for engaging in a depression in the butt of the spear. This was thrown by poising the spear about the level of the shoulder, the spear supported by the fingers of the hand which swung the throwing stick. The latter extended back over the shoulder. The impact of their spears has often been demonstrated to be sufficient to completely penetrate a man's body. Their method of tempering wood for the points of the spears was such that the spearheads offered great resistance. A throwing stick is shown in Figure 52, upper right. These natives decorate their bodies with paints for dances and sports. They know the habits of all of the animals and insects so well that they are able to reproduce the calls of the animals and thus decoy them into traps. Some of the water birds maintain sentinels at lookout points to guard those in the water. The Aborigines are able to decoy these birds by most ingenious methods. They travel with their bodies disguised by grass and shrubbery and enter the water with the headgear made from feathers of one of the birds. Once in the water, they then maneuver in a manner similar to that of the birds and go among the flock of wild ducks or swans. Working entirely underwater, they draw the birds under one by one and take load after load ashore without raising the suspicion of the flock. When working among the kangaroos they are so skilled in preparing movable blinds that they can kill many in a grazing wild pack without alarming the rest, always striking when the animal is grazing. Their skill at fishing probably exceeds that of any other race. They are so highly trained in the knowledge of the habits of the fish and the type of movement that the fish transmits to the water and to the reeds in the water, that one of their important contests between tribes is to see how many fish can be struck in succession with a spear, the fish never being seen, their only information as to its whereabouts being the change in the surface of the water and movement of grasses that are growing in the water as the fish moves. The fish are started by the umpires striking the water. The experts bring up a fish 6 times out of 8. These fishing contests are held along the banks of lakes and rivers where the water is deep enough for some of the reeds and grasses to come to the surface. The contestants travel in canoes. The native canoe is cut in one piece from the side of a tree, the cutting being done with stone axes. The canoe offers an exceedingly treacherous platform from which a standing man must throw his spear. For some of the contests the canoe carries a paddler, but in the most exacting contests the spearman must manage his own flat-bottomed canoe. The skill of the Aborigines in tracking is so phenomenal that practically every large modern town or city in Australia has one or more of these men on its police staff to date to track criminals. For weeks, they carry the detailed information about the characteristics of the prisoner's foot across the desert, and when they come across the man's footprint they recognize it among all others in the same path. Every leaf that is turned over or grain of sand on bare rocks has meaning for them. Their social organization is such that almost every person who had been in intimate contact with them testified that they had never known any of the Aborigines to be guilty of the theft of anything. Even where partly modernized, as they are in the large government reservations, they are trustworthy. A nurse in an emergency hospital told me that she continually left her money, jewelry and other objects of personal property freely exposed and available where many of the hundreds of primitives passing could pick them up, and that she had never known them to take anything. The other nurses had had the same experience. Every boy and girl among these Aborigines must pass many examinations. Their early schooling includes the tracking of small animals and insects. The small boys begin throwing spears almost as soon as they can stand up straight. No young man can even witness a meeting of the council, let alone become a member of it, until he has passed 3 supreme tests of manhood. First, he is tested for his ability to withstand hunger without complaint. The test for this is to go on a march for 2 or 3 days over the hot desert and assist in preparing the meals of roast kangaroo and other choice foods and not partake of any himself. He must not complain. If he becomes too weak, he is given a small portion. There are tests for fear in which he is placed under the most trying ordeals without knowing that it is part of his examination, and he must demonstrate that he will accept death rather than flee. No member of their society would be allowed to continue to live with the tribe if he had defied the ideals of the group. Immorality is cause for immediate death. The growing boys among the Aborigines are taught deference and esteem for their elders in many impressive ways. A boy may not kill or capture a slow-moving animal. That is left for the older men, whom he must call. He must limit his hunting primarily to the fast-fleeing and canny kangaroos and wallabies, whom even a man on horseback cannot outdistance. Racketeers and such unsocial beings could not exist in this type of civilization. Marriages are arranged according to very distinct tribal patterns, and every girl is provided with a husband at a time decided by the council. Their code of ethics is built around the conception of a powerful supreme force that is related to the sun. They believe that there is an after-existence in which the myriads of stars represent the spirits of the Aborigines that lived before. The boys and girls are taught the names of the great characters that make up the different constellations. These were individuals who had conquered all of the temptations of life and had lived so completely in the interest of others that they had fulfilled the great motivating principle of their religion, which is that life consists in serving others as one would wish to be served. The 7 stars of Pleiades were 7 beautiful maidens that had surpassed most other girls in their devotion and service in the interest of their tribe. It is most remarkable how closely this concept is related to the classical myth regarding the 7 daughters of Atlas and the nymph, Pleione. A part of a young man's examination to determine his ability to withstand pain and his power of self-control consists in performing an operation at the time of his graduation. This operation is at the same time calculated to provide him with his badge of attainment. It consists of the boys lying on his back and allowing the appointed operator to knock out one of his front upper teeth. This is done by putting a peg against the tooth and hitting it a series of sharp blows with a stone. He must endure this without flinching. We saw scores that carried this diploma. Prior to this, other very severe tests of physical endurance had been successfully completed. The marvelous vision of these primitive people is illustrated by the fact that they can see many stars that our race cannot see. In this connection, it is authoritatively recorded regarding the Maori of New Zealand that they can see the satellites of Jupiter which are only visible to the white man's eye with the aid of telescopes. These people prove that they can see the satellites by telling the man at the telescope when the eclipse of one of the stars occurs. It is said of these primitive Aborigines of Australia that they can see animals moving at a distance of a mile which ordinary white people cannot see at all. While these evidences of superior physical development command our most profound admiration, their ability to build superb bodies and maintain them in excellent condition in so difficult an environment commands our genuine respect. It is a supreme test of human efficiency. It is doubtful if many places in the world can demonstrate so great a contrast in physical development and perfection of body as that which exists between the primitive aborigines of Australia who have been the sole arbiters of their fate, and those aborigines who have been under the influence of the white man. The white man has deprived them of their original habitats and is now feeding them in reservations while using them as laborers in modern industrial pursuits. This contrast between the primitive aborigines as they still exist in isolated communities in Australia and the modern members of the clans is not, however, much greater than that between these excellent primitives and the whites, near whom they are living. In my comparative study of primitive races in different parts of the world, of modernized members of their groups and of whites who have displaced them, as well as in my study of our typical modern social organization, I have seldom, if ever, found whites suffering so tragically from evidence of physical degeneration, as expressed in tooth decay and change in facial form, as are the whites of Eastern Australia. This has occurred on the very best of the land that these primitives formerly occupied and becomes at once a monument to the wisdom of the primitive aborigines and a signboard of warning to the modern civilization that has supplanted them. Their superb physical excellence is demonstrated in every isolated group in the primitive stocks with which we came in contact. For tribes that have lived along the coast and had access to the sea foods, their stature was large and well formed. When living in the bush they are largely without clothing. Where they are congregated in the reservations they are required to wear clothing. It is important to note in these people the splendid proportions of the faces, all of which are broad, with the dental arches wide and well contoured. This is nature's normal form for all humans and is shown in Figs 53 and 54, upper right. The person in Figure 53, upper left, is a woman. Figure 53. No other primitive race seems to deserve so much credit for skill in obeying nature's laws as these primitive aborigines because of the perpetual drought hazards of much of the land they live in. Half of Australia has less than 10 inches of rain per year. Note the magnificent dental arches and beautiful teeth of these primitives. Tooth decay was almost unknown in many districts. Figure 54. Wherever the primitive aborigines have been placed in reservations and fed on the white man's foods of commerce, dental caries has become rampant. This destroys their beauty, prevents mastication, and provides infection for seriously injuring their bodies. Note the contrast between the primitive woman in the upper right and the three modernized women. Various factors in the changed environment were studied critically. Samples of foods were gathered for chemical analysis, and the changes in the modern diet from that which was characteristic of the primitives were studied. When the teeth of the primitives and the teeth found in the skulls that had been assembled in the museums were examined, it was found that dental caries or tooth decay was exceedingly rare among the isolated groups. Those individuals, however, who had adopted the foods of the white man suffered extremely from tooth decay as did the whites. Where they had no opportunity to get native food to combine with the white man's food their condition was desperate and extreme. This is readily disclosed in Figure 54. Note contrast with upper right. It is quite impossible to imagine the suffering that these people were compelled to endure due to abscessing teeth resulting from rampant tooth decay. As we had found in some of the modernized islands of the Pacific, we discovered that here, too, discouragement and a longing for death had taken the place of a joy in living in many. Few souls in the world have experienced this discouragement and this longing to a greater degree. One of the most important phases of our special quest was to get information that would throw light on the degeneration of the facial pattern that occurs so often in our modern civilization. This has its expression in the narrowing and lengthening of the face and the development of crooked teeth. It is most remarkable and should be one of the most challenging facts that can come to our modern civilization that such primitive races as the Aborigines of Australia have reproduced for generation after generation through many centuries, no one knows for how many thousands of years, without the development of a conspicuous number of irregularities of the dental arches. Yet, In the next generation after these people adopt the foods of the white man, a large percentage of the children developed irregularities of the dental arches with conspicuous facial deformities. The deformity patterns are similar to those seen in white civilizations. Typical illustrations of this will be seen in Figs 55 and 56. Severe deformities of the face were frequently seen in the modernized groups, as evidenced in Figure 57. Figure 55. It is remarkable that regardless of race or color, the new generations born after the adoption by primitives of deficient foods develop in general the same facial and dental arch deformities and skeletal defects. Note the characteristic narrowing of the dental arches and crowding of the teeth of this modernized generation of Aborigines and their similarity to the facial patterns of modern whites. Figure 56. The disturbance in facial growth is often so serious as to make normal breathing through the nose very difficult. This is primarily due to faulty development of the maxillary bones. Figure 57. Deformity patterns produced in the modernized Aborigines of Australia by white men's food. Note the undershort mandible, upper left, the pinched nostrils and facial deformity of all four. The data obtained from a study of the native Australians who are located in a reservation near Sydney, at La Perouse, revealed that among the Aborigines 47.5% of the teeth had been attacked by dental caries, and 40% of the individuals had abnormal dental arches. For the women of this group, 81.3% of all the teeth had been attacked by dental caries, and for the men, 60.4%. And for the children, 16.5%. In this group 100% of the individuals were affected by dental caries. Palm Island is a government reservation situated in the ocean about 50 miles from the mainland, off the east coast of Australia, about 2/3 of the way up the coast. It was reached by a government launch. Included in the population of this reservation are a large number of adults who have been moved from various districts on the mainland of Central and Eastern Australia and many children who were born either before or after their parents were moved to this reservation. The food available on the island is almost entirely that provided by the government. Of 98 individuals examined and measured, 53.1% of them had dental caries. For the group as a whole, 8.9% of all of the teeth were affected. For the women, 21.2%, for the men, 14.2%, and for the children, 5.8%. 50% of the children had deformed dental arches, which occurred in only 11% of the adults. Cape Bedford is situated about 3/4 of the way up the east coast and is so isolated that it was necessary for us to use a special aeroplane to reach it. Landing was made on the beach. This group of people is under the management of a German Lutheran missionary. They are dependent almost entirely on the food provided by the mission and the government. The official in charge had spent 50 years in devoted service to these native people. We found him exceedingly sad because of the very rapid breakdown that was in progress among the natives in his care. The dental caries for the group of 83 individuals studied was 12.4% of their 2,176 teeth examined. For the women, this amounted to 37.2% of the teeth, for the men, 8.4%, and for the children, 6.1%. Of the 83 individuals, 48.1% had been affected by dental caries. Many of the adults in this group had been born on plantations under the influence of the modern nutrition, and many of the children had been born in the mission. For the adults, 46% had abnormally formed dental arches, and for the children, 41.6%. We were advised that deaths occurred very frequently from tuberculosis. This reservation does not provide the natives with natural hunting grounds capable of providing the people with animal life for food. The coast for some distance inland is a series of sand dunes which are slowly being transferred over the vegetation by wind, completely smothering it. While the coast is well supplied with a variety of deep water fish, the natives have practically no equipment for obtaining them, a condition which restricts them very largely to the use of the imported foods supplied by the officials. Our next stop, using the special aeroplane, was at Lockhart River, which is about 4/5 of the way up the east coast of Australia. Here again we were able to land on the beach near a large group of primitive Aborigines. The isolation here is so nearly complete that they are dependent upon the sea and the land for their foods. This part of Australia, namely, the Yorke Peninsula, is still so primitive that there has been very little encroachment by the white population. It will be remembered that in this area there are no roads, the country being a primitive wilderness. Of 58 individuals examined, their 1,784 teeth revealed that only 4.3% had been attacked by dental caries. For the women, this amounted to 3.4%, for the men, 6.1%, and for the children, 3.2%. Some of these men had at some time worked on cattle ranches for the white men. Of the children, only 6.3% had abnormal dental arches, and of the adults, 8.7%. In this group, therefore, 91.4% of all ages had reproduced the typical racial pattern as compared with 56% of the group at Cape Bedford, 62% of the group at Palm Island, and 60% at La Perouse. At Lockhart River, 32.7% of the individuals had dental caries. A reservation called Cowall Creek on the west side of Yorke Peninsula, situated on the Gulf of Carpentaria, was reached by flying our special plane to Horn Island in the Torres Strait north of Australia and proceeding from there by boat to Thursday Island, and on, by boat, to Cowall Creek. In this reservation 35 individuals were studied and found to be in a very pathetic condition. We were told that deaths occurred frequently. Of the 976 teeth examined, 24.6% had been attacked by tooth decay. For the women, this amounted to 60.7%, for the men, 30.4%, and for the children, 8.9%. 49.6% of the individuals studied had abnormal dental arches. Of the children, 66.6% had deformed dental arches, and 9% of the adults. Many of these adults had been raised in the bush. Of the individuals studied, 68.6% had dental caries. One can scarcely visualize, without observing it, the distress of a group of primitive people situated as these people are, compelled to live in a very restricted area, forced to live on food provided by the government, while they are conscious that if they could return to their normal habits of life they would regain their health and again enjoy life. Many individuals were seen with abscessing teeth. One girl with a fistula exuding pus on the outside of her face is shown in figure 58, upper right. In their native life, where they could get the foods that keep them well and preserve their teeth, they had no need for dentists. Now they have need, but have no dentists. It is easy to chide and blame the officials who provide them with the modernized foods under which they are breaking, but it must be remembered that practically all modern civilizations are more or less in the same plight themselves. Figure 58. Aborigines in Australia living on a reservation. The boy at the upper left has suppurating tubercular axillary glands. The girl at the upper right has pus running to the outside of her face from an abscessed tooth. The boy whose legs are shown at the lower left has a badly deformed body from malnutrition. The girl at the lower right has tubercular glands of the neck. An opportunity was provided for examining a group of the native Aborigines of Australia who made up the crew of 18 for a pearl fishing boat. Of this group, 5.7% of their 554 teeth had been attacked by tooth decay. These individuals could be readily divided into two groups, namely, those who had been raised in the bush and those who had been raised in missions. For the 13 raised in the bush, not a single tooth of their 364 teeth had ever been attacked by tooth decay, and not a single individual had deformed dental arches. In contrast with this, of the 5 raised in the mission, 19.3% of their 140 teeth had been attacked by tooth decay, and 40% of these individuals had abnormal dental arches. The cook on the government boat was an Aboriginal Australian from Northern Australia. He had been trained on a military craft as a dietitian. Nearly all his teeth were lost. It is of interest that while the native Aborigines had relatively perfect teeth, this man who was a trained dietitian for the whites had lost nearly all his teeth from tooth decay and pyorrhea. In the group of Aborigines so far reported, there were many who had come from the interior districts of Australia and many who had always lived near the coast. These two types of districts provided quite different types of foods. Those near the coast were able to obtain animal life from the sea, including fish, dugong or sea cow, a great variety of shellfish, and some sea plants. Those from the interior districts could not obtain animal life of the sea, but did obtain animal life of the land, which was eaten with their plant foods in each case. It was quite important to reach a group of Aborigines who had always lived inland and who were on a reservation inland. This contact was made with a group at a government reservation called Cherbourg. A typical group of individuals was examined. Of 45 individuals with 1,236 teeth, 42.5% of the teeth had been attacked by tooth decay. For the women, this constituted 43.7%, for the men, 64.6%, and for the children, 5.6%. Of all of the individuals here examined, 64.5% had dental caries. It is of interest that many of these men had worked on white men's cattle ranches. While the adults showed 11.7% to have deformed dental arches, this rose to 50% for the children of the group. We were informed that in all of these groups tuberculosis was taking a very heavy toll. In Figure 58, upper left, will be seen a boy with a suppurating tubercular gland of the axilla, at the right, a girl with a fistula draining pus onto the outside of the face from an abscessed tooth, below, deformed legs, and a girl with tubercular glands of the neck. A reservation situated on the coast where seafoods were available might be expected to make available a particular type of nutrition through seafoods. The individuals in a reservation for the Aborigines at Tweed Heads, which is so situated, were studied. Of the 27 individuals examined, 89% had dental caries. Of their 774 teeth, 39.7% had been attacked by dental caries. For the women, this amounted to 62.5%, for the men, 70.9%, and for the children, 20.8%. Most of these children had been born in this environment while their parents were being fed, largely, the foods provided by the government in mission. In this group, 83.4% of the children had deformed dental arches, and 33.3% of the adults. An interesting incident was brought to my attention in one of the Australian reservations where the food was practically all supplied by the government. I was told by the director in charge, and in further detail by the other officials, that a number of native babies had become ill while nursing from their mothers. Some had died. By changing the nutrition to a condensed whole milk product, the babies recovered. When placed back on their mother's breast food, they again became ill. The problem was, why was not their mother's milk adequate? I was later told by the director of a condition that had developed in the pen of the reservation's hogs, which were kept to use up the scraps and garbage from the reservation's kitchens. He reported that one after another the hogs went down with a type of paralysis and could not get up. The symptoms were suggestively like vitamin A deficiency in both the babies and the hogs, and indicated the treatment. The rapid degeneration of the Australian Aborigines after the adoption of the government's modern foods provides a demonstration that should be infinitely more convincing than animal experimentation. It should be a matter not only of concern but deep alarm that human beings can degenerate physically so rapidly by the use of a certain type of nutrition, particularly the dietary products used so generally by modern civilization. The child life among the Aborigines of Australia proved to be exceedingly interesting. Children develop independence very young and learn very early to take care of themselves. Mothers are very affectionate and show great concern when their children are not thriving. Two typical mothers with their children are shown in figure 59. These children, as suggested in the picture, were keenly interested in everything that I did, but were not alarmed or frightened. Figure 59. Typical Aborigine mothers with their children. The wonderful wisdom of these primitive people was attested by the principal of the public school at Palm Island. A mother died and her nursing infant was taken care of by its maternal grandmother, who had not recently given birth to a child. She proceeded to carry out the primitive formula for providing breast food by artificial means. Her method was to make an ointment of the fresh bodies of an insect which made its nest in the leaves of a certain tree. This she rubbed on her breast and in a short time produced milk liberally for this foster child. I was shown the type of insect, photographed its nest and the colony inside when the nest was opened. The people who vouched for this circumstance declared that they had seen the entire procedure and knew the facts to be as stated. They further stated that this was common knowledge among the Aborigines. Another important source of information regarding the Aborigines of Australia was provided by a study of the skeletal material and skulls in the museums at Sydney and Canberra, particularly the former. I do not know the number of skulls that are available there for study, but it is very large. I examined many and found them remarkably uniform in design and quality. The dental arches were splendidly formed. The teeth were in excellent condition with exceedingly little dental caries. A characteristic of these skulls was the evidence of a shortage of material for those that had been transferred to a museum from the interior arid plains country. Those skulls, however, that had come from coastal areas where seafoods were available, show much more massive dimensions of the general pattern. In figure 60 will be seen typical skulls showing the normal dental arches and general design of the head. It is of interest to note the very heavy orbital ridges which characterize this race. Figure 60. The buried skulls throughout Australia provide a dependable record of their physical excellence and splendid facial and dental arch forms. In the lower pictures are shown the skull dome of a typical Australian Aborigine for comparison with that of the recently discovered Peking man who possibly lived 1 million years ago. I have previously referred to a report by Professor Weidenreich regarding the resemblance of the Australian native skulls to those of the recently discovered Peking man in the caves of China. In figure 60 are two views for comparison. The skull at the left is that of an Australian primitive photographed in a museum in Sydney, and an outline of the Peking skull is shown at the right. Professor Weidenreich has emphasized the observations that when three skulls are put in series, namely, the Australian primitive, the Peking skull and a chimpanzee skull, the Peking skull appears to be about halfway between the two in design and developmental order. The Australian primitive's skull is higher in the crown, showing much greater brain capacity. The supraorbital depressions are less deep in the Peking than in the chimpanzee, and still less deep in the Australian primitive. The supraorbital ridges which produce the prominent eyebrows are less pronounced in the Australian primitive than in the Peking man, and still more prominent in the chimpanzee. The prominent supraorbital ridges of the chimpanzee face are shown in figure 48. The age of the Peking skulls has been variously placed from several 100,000 to 1 million years. A distinguished anthropologist has stated that the Australian primitives are the only people living on the Earth today that could be part of the first race of mankind. It is a matter of concern that if a scale were extended a mile long and the decades represented by inches, there would apparently be more degeneration in the last few inches than in the preceding mile. This gives some idea of the virulence of the blight contributed by our modern civilization. The foods available for these people are exceedingly limited in variety and quantity, due to the absence of rains, and unfertility of the soil. For plant foods they used roots, stems, leaves, berries and seeds of grasses, and are native pea eaten with tissues of large and small animals. The large animals available are the kangaroo and wallaby. Among the small animals they have a variety of rodents, insects, beetles and grubs, and wherever available various forms of animal life from the rivers and oceans. Birds and birds' eggs are used where available. They are able to balance their rations to provide the requisites for splendid bodybuilding and body repair. In several parts of Australia, which originally supported a large population of the primitives, none are left except a few score in reservations. These also are rapidly disappearing. Their fertility has been so greatly reduced that the death rate far exceeds the birth rate. This group provides evidence of exceptional efficiency in obeying the laws of nature through thousands of years, even in a parched land that is exceedingly inhospitable because of the scant plant foods for either men or animals. While the Aborigines are credited with being the oldest race on the face of the earth today, they are dying out with great rapidity wherever they have changed their native nutrition to that of the modern white civilization. For them this is not a matter of choice, but rather of necessity, since in a large part of Australia the few that are left are crowded into reservations where they have little or no access to native foods and are compelled to live on the foods provided for them by our white civilization. They demonstrate in a tragic way the inadequacy of the white man's dietary programs. Chapter 11: Isolated and Modernized Torres Strait Islanders. In studying the relationship between nutrition and physical characteristics, it is important to make observations at the point of contact with civilization where as few factors as possible in the environment have been modified by that contact. My previous studies have shown that wherever groups of people were utilizing seafoods abundantly in connection with land plants including roots, greens and fruits, they enjoyed fine physical development with uniform reproduction of the racial pattern and a very high immunity to dental caries. For this particular study we wished to select a racial group living on islands in tropical or subtropical climate, whose ancestral stocks differed from those previously observed, and which was located at points of contact with modern civilization. A high level of excellence might be expected among the groups who were in process of being modernized but were still utilizing the native foods. For this study the inhabitants of islands north of Australia were chosen in order to record the effect on the Asiatic and Malay stocks at the points of contact of the north with the south and of the east with the west. In the Torres Strait there are a number of fertile islands supporting populations of from several hundred to a few thousand individuals each. These groups are in an area of the sea that is well stocked with sea animal life, and during the past they have been sufficiently isolated to provide protection. The racial stocks have retained their identities and include Papuans, New Guineans, Mobuags, Araucans, Kendals and Yonkers. The splendid dental arches of these groups will be seen in the various illustrations. Many of the girls are quite prepossessing, as may be seen in Figure 61. Figure 61. The inhabitants of the islands north of Australia have splendidly built bodies with fine facial and dental arch form. With the valuable assistance of the officials of the Australian government we were able to make investigations on several islands in the Torres Strait. The local administrator provided us with a government boat and personal introductions to the local chief and local representatives of the government. We were accompanied by the administrator and by the general manager of the government stores. These stores have been located on the various islands, and the profit derived from them is used for administrative expenses of the government. They provide modern clothing in addition to foods, chiefly white flour, polished rice, canned goods, and sugar. Studies were made on the various islands in the order in which the stores had been installed on them. It is important to have in mind the nature of these islands. Some are of volcanic origin and have rugged interiors with deep bays, others are of coral origin. All are in a zone that is abundantly supplied with sea animal life, this being the scene of the richest pearl fishing industry in the world. Bodu Island had had the store for the longest period, namely 23 years. Of the 586 teeth of 20 individuals examined, 20.6% had been attacked by tooth decay. Of the individuals examined, 95% had dental caries. Unfortunately, our stay at this island was accompanied by a torrential downpour which made it very difficult for us to carry forward our investigations. Had we been able to examine the mothers, the figures doubtless would have been much higher. The children were examined at the school and showed 18.8% of the teeth to have been attacked by tooth decay. The men examined showed 21.9%. Figures given me by Dr. Gibson, who had been taken by the government to the island to make extractions, showed that he found as high as 60% of the teeth had been attacked by tooth decay. For the children of this group, 33.3% had abnormal dental arches, whereas only 9.1% of the adults' arches were abnormally formed. On York Island, 1,876 teeth of 65 individuals showed that 12.7% had been attacked by tooth decay. For the women, this was 20.2%, for the men, 12.1%, and for the children, 7%. For the children, 47.1% had abnormal dental arches. For the adults, 27% were affected. The individuals on this island had been in contact with the pearl fisheries industry for several years. Several of the men had been working on the fishing boat. Of the 65 individuals examined, 67.6% had dental caries. On Darnley Island, 33 individuals showed that of their 900 teeth, 5.7% had been attacked by tooth decay. The store had been established on this island recently. For the women, 16.6% of the teeth had been attacked, for the men, 6.3%, and for the children, 4.1%. On this island, 29.6% of the children showed abnormal dental arches, and 14.3% of the adults. Of the whole group, 46.1% had been attacked by dental caries. On Murray Island, where a store had recently been established, of the 1,074 teeth examined for 39 individuals, only 0.7% of the teeth had been attacked by tooth decay. For the women, this amounted to 2%, for the men, 1.7%, and for the children, 0.26%. Only 12.8% of the group had dental caries. It is significant that the natives were conscious of a danger from the presence on the island of a store providing imported foods. This had been so serious a problem that there was a question whether it would be safe for us to land, since on the last visit of the government officials, blood was almost shed because of the opposition of the natives to the government test program. The result of our examination indicates that dental caries on these islands shows an incidence which has an apparent direct relationship to the length of time government stores have been established there. The immunity to dental caries on this island is nearly 100%. Of the adults, 14.3% had abnormal dental arches, and of the children, 34.4%. Thursday Island is the location of the administrative center for the group. Although it is the best sheltered harbor and affords protection for small boats in the Torres Strait, it was not originally inhabited by the natives. They considered it unfit for habitation because the soil was so poor that it could not provide the proper plant foods to be eaten with the seafoods which are abundant about all of the islands. Nearly all of the whites inhabiting the islands of this district live on this island. They are the families of the administrative officers and of merchants who are engaged in the pearl industry. Owing to the infertility of the soil, practically all of the food has to be shipped in except the little that the whites obtain from the sea. On the island there were many native families, with children attending the native school, while their fathers worked in the pearling fleets. 30 individuals in 3 fleets were examined, and of their 960 teeth only 35 had been attacked by dental caries, or 3.6%. Of these 30 individuals, 5, or 16.3% had abnormal dental arches. The men who had teeth attacked by dental caries informed me that this had happened after they had engaged on the pearling vessels and began to use the foods provided there. In the native school on Thursday Island, 23 children were examined. They were living in homes in which a considerable part of the food was purchased at the company's stores. The incidence of tooth decay was 12.2% of their 664 teeth. Many of these Thursday Island children had been born since their parents had begun using the commercial foods provided to the islanders. Among 23 individuals, 43.5% had abnormal dental arches. While these investigations were planned and carried out primarily to obtain data on the condition of the native races in contact with modern white civilization, wherever possible, data were obtained on the whites also. In a school for whites on Thursday Island, 50 children were examined with regard to their dental arches, but an embarrassing situation was encountered with regard to the sensitiveness of the whites in the matter of having their children examined for dental caries. Figures were obtained for the facial development which reveal that, out of the 50 children examined, 64% had irregularities of facial and dental arch development. In the upper half of Figure 62, will be seen a group of children photographed in the native school, and in the lower a group of white girls photographed at the white school. The difference in their facial development is readily seen. The son of the white teacher, Figure 66, left, had marked underdevelopment of his face. The white population lived largely on canned food. Figure 62. School children from the two groups on Thursday Island. Note the beautifully proportioned faces of the natives, and the pinched nostrils and marked disturbance in proportions of the faces of the whites. The dental arches of the natives are broad, while many of the whites have very crowded teeth. The parents and children of the natives used native foods while the parents and children of the whites used the modern imported foods of commerce. Hammond Island adjoins Thursday Island sufficiently close by to be easily reached in small boats. Accordingly, the people of this island have access to the stores of the white settlement on Thursday Island. Unlike Thursday Island, Hammond Island is quite fertile. Of 27 individuals, all of native stock, 16.5% of their 732 teeth had been attacked by dental caries, and 40% of the individuals showed some deformity of the dental arches. After examining the children at the mission school, I inquired whether there were not families on the island that were living entirely isolated from contact with modern influences. I was taken to the far side of the island to an isolated family. This family had continued to live on their own resources. They were raising vegetables including bananas, pumpkins, and pawpaws. In the cases of the 3 girls in the family, one with a child 5 months of age, only 6 of their 84 teeth had been attacked by tooth decay, or 7.1%, as compared with 16.5% for the entire group on this island. These 3 girls all had normally developed dental arches and normal features. 3 of the girls are shown in Figure 63. We inquired about the mother and were told that she was out fishing, notwithstanding the fact that the sea was quite rough. While we were there, she came in with 2 fish, Figure 63. Here was one of the principal secrets of their happiness and success in life. The Catholic priest who had charge of the mission on this island told me that this family practically never asked for assistance of any kind, and was always in a position to help others. They were happy and well nourished. It is important to note that the progressive degeneration in facial form which occurred in many of the families on the other islands was not found in this family. Figure 63. These pictures tell an interesting story. The grandmother shown in the lower right knew the importance of seafood for her children and grandchildren and did the fishing herself. Note the beautiful teeth and well-formed faces of her daughters. The incidence of dental caries ranged from 20.6% of all of the teeth examined for the various age groups on Badu Island to 0.7% on Murray Island. A group of individuals from this island will be seen in Figure 64. Note the remarkable width of the dental arches. Note also in this connection that the natives of this island are conscious of the superior food of their locality and wish that their people were not required to purchase food from the government store. The island is situated on the barrier reef and has an abundant supply of small fish. The swarms of fish are often so dense that the natives throw a spear with several prongs into the school of fish, and when the spear is drawn back, there are several fish on it. This condition provides abundant food for sharks, many of which could be seen surrounding the schools of small fish. Encircling the group, they dashed in, mouths open, and gorged themselves with the mass of fish from the water. It seemed quite remarkable that the people were willing to go into the water to spear the fish within the zone frequently approached by the sharks, but I was told by the natives that when the fish are so abundant the sharks never attack human beings. One of the natives rowed me in his canoe to a point where I could photograph the sharks at close range. To show his disdain for the shark, he had no hesitancy in standing up in the end of the canoe and hurling his spear into the side of the monster. The spear was immediately thrown out by the shark, which had not been frightened sufficiently to make it leave the scene of action. The sharks in my pictures were swimming so close to the shore that the upper part of the tail was forced out of the water, also the back fin, in order to clear the bottom. It was a great revelation to watch the movement of the tail. Instead of swinging it from side to side like other fish, with which I was familiar, the shark would rotate its tail half or 3/4 of a turn in a motion like that of a propeller of a boat, then reverse the motion for the return trip. By a sudden increase of speed in this motion, the shark could dart ahead at a rapid rate, corral the small fish by encircling them, and finally make a dash through the school with its mouth open. Hundreds of the small fish, in order to escape, dart out of the water into the air. This exposes them to the birds, a flock of which follows the sharks when they are feeding on the fish. The birds dive down at the time they see the shark making his raid and catch the small fish as they dart out of the water. It is by the birds of prey that the native fishermen from their lookout locate the schools of fish. While there is a difference of opinion as to whether some species of shark will attack human beings, we saw one pearl diver who bore enormous scars received from the jaws of a shark. Figure 64. Natives on the islands of the Great Barrier Reef. The dental arches here teach a high degree of excellence. The procedure on one island is to snare the sharks by calling them by means of special sounds made by clapping together two large half shells on the surface of the water. This attracts the shark, and then the men one at a time go into the water with a sharp stick with which they guard themselves against attack. A noose made of rope of coconut fiber is slipped over the shark's head and over the back fin. It is then allowed to tire out and is brought to shore. It was not unusual in a good season for the shark fishers to bring in 3 or 4 in a night's fishing. The strength of the native swimmers is almost beyond belief. The pearling boats are frequently in great danger of being dashed to pieces on a coral reef, since in those waters gales of 50 miles an hour are frequent. We experienced some such gales. On one occasion, when the pearling boat was wrecked some distance from an exposed rock, one strong swimmer rescued and helped a dozen of the crew to the rock, and was himself rescued after being in the water continuously for 32 hours. The pearling boats feed their crew largely on commercial provisions. When the men have been continuously on the boats for 1 or 2 years, or often when they have been at sea using this food for 6 months, they have rampant tooth decay. When the cavities approach or reach the pulp chambers, the pain produced in the teeth by the high pressure in deep water produces such agony that they often have to give up pearling. Physical characteristics of all these residents of the Torres Strait Islands, regardless of their tribal group, were sturdy development throughout their bodies, broad dental arches, and for all of those who had always lived only on their native food, a close proximity to 100% immunity to dental caries. These men are natural mariners. They do not hesitate to make long trips even in rough seas in their homemade crafts. They have an uncanny skill in determining the location of invisible coral reefs. They relate the height of the swell as it rolls over the reef to particular color tones in the water, all of which were too vague for me to see even when they were pointed out. Among the inhabitants of the Torres Strait Islands, almost all individuals who had been born before the foods of modern civilization had become available were found to have dental arches normal in form. In many families, however, living on islands where a store had been established for some time, and on Thursday Island where imported foods had been available for several decades, many individuals were found who had been born since the use of imported foods. They had gross deformities of the dental arches. This fact is illustrated in Figure 65, in which typical depression of the laterals and narrowing of the upper arch and abnormal prominence of the cuspids due to the lack of space for the normal eruption may be seen. The facial deformity in two white boys is seen in Figure 66. Rampant tooth decay in white children is shown in Figure 67. Figure 65. The contrast between the primitive and modernized natives in facial and dental arch form is as striking here as elsewhere. These young natives were born to parents who had adopted our modern foods of commerce. Note the narrowed faces and dental arches with pinched nostrils and crowding of the teeth. Their magnificent heredity could not protect them. Figure 66. These children are from the white colony on Thursday Island. Note the pinched nostrils and deformed dental arches with crowding of the teeth. The boy at the left is a mouth breather. Figure 67. As everywhere, these whites prefer the modernized foods and pay the penalty in rampant tooth decay. They are in pathetic contrast with the superb unspoiled natives. They are within reach of some of the best foods to be found anywhere in the world and yet do not use them, a typical characteristic of modern whites. We are particularly concerned with data that will throw light on the nature of the forces responsible for the production of these deformities. Since they do not appear to their full extent until the eruption of the permanent teeth as part of the development of the adult, it is easy for the abnormality to be ascribed to the period of child growth. As a result, it has been related to faulty breathing habits, thumb sucking, posture, or sleeping habits of the child. It would be difficult to find a more happy and contented people than the primitives in the Torres Strait Islands as they lived without contact with modern civilization. Indeed, they seem to resent very acutely the modern intrusion. They not only have nearly perfect bodies, but an associated personality and character of a high degree of excellence. One is continually impressed with happiness, peace and health while in their congenial presence. These people are not lazy, but they do not struggle over hard to obtain food. Necessities that are not readily at hand they do not have. Their home life reaches a very high ideal, and among them there is practically no crime. In their native state they have exceedingly little disease. Dr. J. R. Nemo, the government physician in charge of the supervision of this group, told me in his 13 years with them he had not seen a single case of malignancy, and had seen only one that he had suspected might be malignancy among the entire 4,000 native population. He stated that during this same period he had operated several dozen malignancies for the white population, which numbers about 300. He reported that among the primitive stock other affections requiring surgical interference were rare. The environment of the Torres Strait Islanders provides a very liberal supply of seafoods and fertile islands on which an adequate quantity of tropical plants are readily grown. Taro, bananas, papaya, and plums are all grown abundantly. The seafoods include large and small fish in great abundance, dugong, and a great variety of shellfish. These foods have developed for them remarkable physiques with practically complete immunity to dental caries. Wherever they have adopted the white man's foods, however, they suffer the typical expressions of degeneration, such as loss of immunity to dental caries, and in the succeeding generations there is a marked change in facial and dental arch form with marked lowering of resistance to disease. Chapter 12, Isolated and Modernized New Zealand Maori. Because of the fine reputation of the racial stock in its primitive condition, it was with particular interest that studies were made in New Zealand. Pick Ariel, 1, has made a very extensive study of the New Zealand Maori, both by examination of the skulls and by examination of the relatively primitive living Maori. He states, in an examination of 250 Maori skulls all from an uncivilized age, I found carriers' teeth present in only 2 skulls, or 0.76%. By taking the average of mummeries and my own investigations, the incidence of caries in the Maori is found to be 1.2% in a total of 326 skulls. This is lower even than the Esquimau, and shows the Maori to have been the most immune race to caries, for which statistics are available. Comparing these figures with those applicable to the present time, we find that the descendants of the Britons and Anglo-Saxons are afflicted with dental caries to the extent of 86% to 98%, and after examining 50 Maori school children living under European conditions entirely, I found that 95% of them had decayed teeth. It will be noted that the basis of computation in the above is percentage of individuals with caries. I am using in addition to these figures the percentage of teeth attacked by dental caries. Expressed in percentage of teeth affected, the figure for Picariel's group would be 0.05 or 1 in 2,000 teeth. We were deeply indebted to the government officials in New Zealand for their invaluable assistance. In anticipation of making these studies, I had been in correspondence with the officials for over 2 years. When we arrived at Auckland, New Zealand, on our way to Australia, our ship was in port for 1 day. We were met by Colonel Saunders, Director of Oral Hygiene in the New Zealand Department of Public Health, who had been sent from the capital at Wellington to offer assistance. A personal representative of the government was sent as guide, and transportation to the various Maori settlements in which we wished to make our studies was provided. New Zealand is setting a standard for the world in the care of growing children as well as in many other health problems. A large percentage of the schools in New Zealand are provided with dental service. A specially trained woman was in charge of the work in each school under Colonel Saunders' supervision. The operations performed by these young women on children far exceeded in quality the average that I have seen by dentists in America. Their plan gives dental care to children 12 years of age and under, provided the parents express a wish that their children received that care. The service was being extended rapidly to all communities. Since my return, I have learned that the work is being organized to provide for every community of New Zealand. The art of the Maori gives evidence of their great ability and skill in sculpturing. Boys and girls do beautiful carving and weaving. All native buildings and structures are embellished with carvings, often in fine detail. It was most gratifying to find neat and well-appointed dental office buildings for both natives and whites, located beside a large number of the public schools throughout New Zealand. In many communities 2 or 3 schools were served by the same operator. Children were either brought to the central dental infirmary or provision was made for an operating room in the vicinity of each school. The operator went from district to district. A typical dental infirmary is shown in Figure 68, with Colonel Saunders and one of his efficient women operators in the foreground. I had suggested that I should be glad to have observers from the Department of Health accompany us or arrange to be present at convenient places to observe the conditions and to note my interpretations of them. From 2 to 5 such observers were generally present, including the official representative of the department. The planning of the itinerary was very greatly assisted by a Maori Member of Parliament, Mr. Aparanangata. Figure 68. The New Zealand government provides nearly universal free dental service for the children, regardless of colour, to the age of 12 years. This is a typical dental clinic maintained in connection with the school system. They are operated by trained dental hygienists. The director of the system, Colonel Saunders, is seen in the picture. Although New Zealand is a new country with a relatively small population, there being approximately only 1.5 million individuals, the building of highways has rapidly been extended to include all modernized sections. In order to reach the most remote groups, it was often necessary to go beyond the zone of public improvements and follow quite primitive trails. Fortunately, this was possible because it was the dry season. Even then, many streams had to be forded, which would have been quite impossible at other seasons of the year. We were able to average approximately 100 miles of travel per day for 18 days, visiting 25 districts and making examinations of native Maori families and children in native schools, representing various stages of modernization. This included a few white schools and tubercular sanitariums. Since over 95% of the New Zealanders are to be found in the North Island, our investigations were limited to this island. Our itinerary started at Wellington at the south end of the North Island and progressed northward in such a way as to reach both the principal centres of native population who were modernised and those who were more isolated. This latter group, however, was a small part of the total native population. Detailed examinations including measurements and photographic records were made in 22 groups consisting chiefly of the older children in public schools. In the examination of 535 individuals in these 22 school districts, their 15,332 teeth revealed that 3,420 had been attacked by dental caries, or 22.3%. In the most modernized groups, 31 to 50% had dental caries. In the most isolated group, only 2% of the teeth had been attacked by dental caries. The incidence of deformity of dental arches in the modernized groups ranged from 40 to 100%. In many districts, members of the older generations revealed 100% normally formed dental arches. The children of these individuals, however, showed a much higher percentage of deformed dental arches. These data are in striking contrast with the condition of the teeth and dental arches of the skulls of the Maori before contact with the white man, and the reports of examinations by early scientists who made contact with the primitive Maori before he was modernized. These reports revealed only one tooth in 2,000 teeth attacked by dental caries with practically 100% normally formed dental arches. My investigations were made in the following places in the North Island. The Pukarora Tubercular Sanatorium provided 40 native Maori for studies. These were largely young men and women, and being in a modern institution, they were receiving the modern foods of the whites of New Zealand. Their modernization was demonstrated not only by the high incidence of dental caries but also by the fact that 90% of the adults and 100% of the children had abnormalities of the dental arches. The Pukarora College for Maori Girls is at Napier. These girls were largely from modernized native homes and were now living in a modern institution. Their modernization was expressed in their high percentage of dental caries and their deformed dental arches. At the New Hooker School, an opportunity was provided through the assistance of the government officials to study the parents of many of the children. Tooth decay was widespread among the women and active among both the men and children. The Maya Peninsula provided one of the more isolated groups which showed a marked difference between the older generation and the new. These people had good access to seafoods, and those still using these abundantly had much the best teeth. A group of the children who had been born and raised in this district and who had lived largely on the native foods had only 1.7% of their teeth attacked by dental caries. The other places studied were Rokokor, Tekaha, Rotoki, Rotaroa, Tehoro, Waimeo, Tuahu, Kaiko, Waikara, Motri Bay, Ahipara, Manukau, Roina, Ellerslie, Queen Victoria School at Auckland and Waipawa. New Zealand has become justly famous for its scenery. The South Island has been frequently termed the Southern Alps because of its snow-capped mountains and glaciers. Of the 70,000 members of the Maori race living in the two islands, about 2,000 are on the South Island and the balance on the North Island. While snow is present on many of the mountains of the North Island in the winter season, only a few of the higher peaks are snow-capped during the summer. Most of the shoreline of the seacoast of the South Island is very rugged, with glaciers descending almost to the sea. The coastline of the North Island is broken and in places is quite rugged. The approach to the Maya Peninsula is along a rocky coast skirting the bay. The most important industries of New Zealand are dairy products, and sheep raising for wool. The reputation of the Maori people for splendid physiques has placed them on a pedestal of perfection. Much of this has been lost in modernization. However, through the assistance of the government, I was able to see many excellent physical specimens. In Figure 69 will be seen four typical Maori who retained much of the tribal excellence. Note their fine dental arches. A young Maori man who stands about 6 feet 4 inches and weighs 230 pounds was examined. The Maori men have great physical endurance and good minds. Many fine lawyers and government executives are Maori. The breakdown of these people comes when they depart from their native foods to the foods of modern civilization, foods consisting largely of white flour, sweetened goods, syrup and canned goods. The effect is similar to that experienced by other races after using foods of modern civilization. Typical illustrations of tooth decay are shown in Figure 70. In some individuals still in their teens, half of the teeth were decayed. The tooth decay among the whites of New Zealand and Australia was severe. This is illustrated in Figure 71. Particularly striking is the similarity between the deformities of the dental arches which occur in the Maori people who were born after their parents adopted the modern foods, and those of the whites. This is well illustrated in Figure 72 for Maori boys. In my studies among other modernized primitive racial stocks, there was a very high incidence of facial deformity, which approached 100% among individuals in tuberculosis sanatoria. This condition obtained also in New Zealand. Figure 69. Since the discovery of New Zealand, the primitive natives, the Man, have had the reputation of having the finest teeth and finest bodies of any race in the world. These faces are typical. Only about 1 tooth per 1,000 teeth had been attacked by tooth decay before they came under the influence of the white man. Figure 70. With the advent of the white man in New Zealand, tooth decay has become rampant. The suffering from dental caries and abscissed teeth is very great in the most modernized Maori. The boy at the lower left has a deep scar in his upper lip from an accident. Figure 71. Whereas the original primitive Maori had reportedly the finest teeth in the world, the whites now in New Zealand are claimed to have the poorest teeth in the world. These individuals are typical. An analysis of the two types of food reveals the reason. Figure 72. In striking contrast with the beautiful faces of the primitive Maori, those born since the adoption of deficient modernized foods are grossly deformed. Note the marked underdevelopment of the facial bones, one of the results being narrowing of the dental arches with crowding of the teeth and an underdevelopment of the air passages. We have wrongly assigned these distorted forms to mixture of racial bloods. Through the kindness of the director of the Maori Museum at Auckland, I was able to examine many Maori skulls. Two views are shown in Figure 73. The skulls belong in the pre-Columbian period. Note the splendid design of the face and dental arches and high perfection of the teeth. Figure 73. The large collections of skulls of the ancient man of New Zealand attest to their superb physical development and to the excellence of their dental arches. One of the most important developments to come out of these investigations of primitive races is the evidence of a rapid decline in maternal reproductive efficiency after an abandonment of the native foods and the substitution of foods of modern civilization. This is discussed in later chapters. It was particularly instructive to observe the diligence with which some of the isolated Maori near the coast sought out certain types of food in accordance with the tradition and accumulated wisdom of their tribes. As among the various archipelagos and island dwellers of the Pacific, great emphasis was placed upon shellfish. Much effort was made to obtain these in large quantities. In Figure 74, lower, will be seen two boys who have been gathering sea clams found abundantly on these shores. Much of the fishing is done when the tide is out. some groups used large quantities of the species called abalone on the west coast of America and Poa in New Zealand. In Figure 74, a man, his wife and child are shown. The father is holding an abalone. The little girl is holding a mollusk found only in New Zealand. The Teheroa, the mother, is holding a plate of edible kelp which these people use abundantly, as do many sea-bordering races. Maori boys enjoy a species of grubs which they seek with great eagerness and prize highly. The primitive Maori used large quantities of fern root which grows abundantly and is very nutritious. Figure 74. Native Maori demonstrating some of the accessory essentials obtained from the sea. These include certain seaweeds and an assortment of shellfish. It is much easier for the moderns to exchange their labor for the palate-tickling devitalized foods of commerce than to obtain the native foods of land and sea. Probably few primitive races have developed calisthenics and systematic physical exercise to so high a point as the primitive Maori. On arising early in the morning, the chief of the village starts singing a song which is accompanied by a rhythmic dance. This is taken up not only by the members of his household, but by all in the adjoining households until the entire village is swaying in unison to the same tempo. This has a remarkably beneficial effect in not only developing deep breathing, but in developing the muscles of the body, particularly those of the abdomen, with the result that these people maintain excellent figures to old age. Sir Arbuthnot Lane, too, said of this practice the following. As to daily exercise, it is shown here that every person capable of movement can benefit by it, and I am certain that the only natural and really beneficial system of exercise is that developed through long ages by the New Zealand Maori and their race brothers in other lands. The practical application of their wisdom is discussed in Chapter 21. The Maori race developed a knowledge of nature's laws and adopted a system of living in harmony with those laws to so high a degree that they were able to build what was reported by early scientists to be the most physically perfect race living on the face of the earth. They accomplished this largely through a diet and a system of social organization designed to provide a high degree of perfection in their offspring. To do this they utilized foods from the sea very liberally. The fact that they were able to maintain immunity to dental caries so high that only one tooth in 2000 had been attacked by tooth decay, which is probably as high a degree of immunity as that of any contemporary race, is a strong argument in favor of their plan of life.